Hello and welcome everybody to the JHJC Forum on Israel Security and U.S. Relations. My name is Bradley Adams. I'm the Managing Director here at the Jackson Hole Jewish Community. I would like to let you all know or remind you that this event is closed to the press. If you are thinking about recording something, please don't. There's bathroom out and around the corner here. I'd also like to thank our sponsors for today's event. That is Beryl Weiner and Joyce Craig. We have Melanie Nussdorf, Cliff and Julie Sobin, Stephen Melzer, and Ben Goldberg. And I suppose without further ado, I will bring up Cliff, who will be introducing the man of the hour. Thank you, Cliff.
Thank you. So we'll just tell you, make sure everyone understands the events. First of all, Bobby Holik will be speaking, be our main speaker. I'll be, as you can tell, in our size difference, the much more minor speaker that will follow him for a little bit. And then we'll have Senator Lummis come here. But I want to introduce Bobby. Bobby is a Czech American, played hockey in the NHL for 18 years. I had no idea how you managed to have an 18-year-long career there. The orthopedic surgeon here would wonder that. Hopefully you didn't beat my caps too many times. But after that, you might wonder, why is Bobby speaking here to an Israel forum? And that's because afterwards, of the many things he did, he became coach of, if I'm correct, the Israel hockey team. And then he got involved in some things with the NHL and international attempts to prevent the Israel hockey team from playing. He is a long-time Jackson Hole resident here with his wife, and I'm sorry, Renee, because I'm 69 and I forget all names. But with that, let's bring Bobby up. It's going to be a very interesting talk, I think.
Well, thank you very much. Welcome. Even though I'm just a guest speaker here, but I welcome you anyway. So thank you for coming.
Move that way closer to the.
Okay.
Thank you.
Cliff tried to, he did a good job introducing, but I want to kind of go in a little more detail why I'm actually here speaking. Sometimes I don't know myself, but we'll try to get through it. So I was born in Czechoslovakia in the early 70s, 1971. It was shortly after, people say 26 years after the war, but I'm putting all this information out there so this kind of you can create a picture where I'm coming from, literally and figuratively. So I was born in Czechoslovakia, at the time Czechoslovakia, in Czech Republic, on the Czech Republic side. Grew up there, first 19 years of my life, played hockey, learned how to play hockey. My father was national legend hockey player. My uncle is a national legend hockey player, world champions, Olympic medalist. So hockey is in our blood. It was not a coincidence that I played hockey. I talk about hockey a lot because that was part of my identity for a long time. But as my dad said, my grandfather's, hockey's good, hockey's great, but it's not everything. All my life, I was interested in history, in geography, geopolitics since I remember. It was very hard growing up because all we had was 2 state-run TV channels. And you can only imagine, it's probably what's happening. If it wasn't for the internet, Chinese or Russians had the same thing they might still have that because it's easier to control those flow of information if you only have 2 channels and the government's in charge of it. But my grandfather was denied education because of his lack of family background. He was an orphan, and there was a huge stress on education coming from him. So I continued my education. When I played hockey, I started playing professionally. It's my other passion: history, geography. My dad provided me with the skills and the will and all the necessary values to be successful in hockey. But he also, by genetics, and by his, his coaching and teaching, he was staunch anti-communist regime, outspoken person. It cost him dearly during his career, but ultimately he decided to be great enough or good enough that it couldn't really affect him or his career, because communism used sports as propaganda. So he was good enough, or today I can say he was great enough, that no matter how outspoken he was against the regime because of his childhood memories, they couldn't stop him. They tried. There were secret police files on him and all that, but ultimately they couldn't stop because he spoke the truth. He spoke about the tyranny of the regime, tyranny of the one-party government, tyranny of living without a freedom of speech and all that. And the only way he could do that is because he excelled. He was so important to the country's national team that they tried, but they just couldn't stop him. And you know what? Whether he wanted me to be that way or not, the genetics are part of us. And even if I got a quarter of his resilience, then I got plenty. And that kind of led me through my youth. And then my parents raised me with the idea of defecting, because they said, living in Czechoslovakia and a communist country was not a place for you or my sister. And my sister was a professional tennis player. She defected in mid 80s, 1987. I was still too young to do that. I was playing on the junior national teams, traveling around the world. But when she defected, they stopped me. And I decided this is an opportunity too good to be denied. So I kept working. I kept, working at my game, at my intellect, at everything I could work on to be better than I was. And ultimately, they took me back on the national teams, even though my sister was a defector and, she was exiled at that time. So that's a little bit of background. Then the late 80s, as most of you know, with the democratic changes in Czechoslovakia, I had an opportunity to come to the United States because I was drafted by the National Hockey Team League in Hartford, Connecticut, and that opened the door for me to come here and play professionally here, which is most hockey players' goal, because this is the elite of the elite leagues. And if you want to measure yourself, if you belong amongst the best, you got to play in North America. And I got the opportunity shortly after the Velvet Revolution, because I needed to stay and serve 2 years in the military. This way, if I defect, it's easier to come back. I mean, not necessarily come back, but your parents might not be persecuted. Your family, you might be able to see them eventually. So I entered the military, and I was going to play for the army team. Like you've heard of Red Army teams in Russia. We had the same kind of version in Czechoslovakia. But 6 months later, the changes happened. So following year, I left the military. I left the country. I started playing here. I met my wonderful wife the first day I was on this continent, and we've been together ever since. Not as at that time, it took a long time, but we're here. Then learning about history, about Israel, because there was something grabbing me constantly throughout my childhood. Why is Israel doing what they're doing? It's the way they protect themselves, the way they desire to right for self-determination. When it's such a small country, they're even smaller than what Czech Republic was at the time. And they'll always, no matter what I studied, no matter what I did, no matter what I learned, it was just always this draw to find out. And I came to the United States, and I finally get opportunities to get my hands on uncensored literature or books or education material. And again, I continue my love of history and learning, and ironically, growing up fairly shortly, 26, 25, 30 years after the war, I was telling the gentleman I met earlier that people there, we had Jewish people, we had old synagogue, they were turned into a storage silos and all that, because that's what communists did. But nobody, I never met a Jewish person in my life because they were scared to claim, what happened to them or what happened to the region in the 40s. They suddenly pulled back. And I was like, okay, this is our history. They were here, but they're not here now. I come to the United States and I'm like, okay, I meet Jewish people. I'm so excited because they are such a wonderful people. And then suddenly it's coming together that people in Czechoslovakia at the time, the first 30, 40, 50 years, even 60 years after the war, they were just hiding their identity. Perfect example, Madeleine Albright. The parents took her out of the country. They had an opportunity to leave. They ended up in England, and she didn't find out that who her true identity was till she was almost 7 years old, if not older. And that's across thousands of people. So, and I knew it was around me. I just didn't know how much of it. And so come to the United States, and you're repeating myself, but I'm here, I'm learning, I'm coming across and I'm learning the history of the true, real history of the Jewish nations and land of Israel and country of Israel. And I'm like, wow, this is amazing, because how can it be happening? And then it couldn't happen to Czech Republic or Slovakia or Hungary or Poland is quite a large country for European size. But so I'm doing my homework, and I'm realizing that all those years Czechs were supporting Israel for some reason. I don't know if you remember, but when the start of War of Independence, at the start of the War of Independence, Czechoslovakia was the first nation who supplied Israel with weapons and material and means to defend themselves. And it took me a long time until last Thursday to realize that Czechs experienced thriving democracy amongst an enemy, surrounded by enemies between 1918 to 1938, which is post-World War I, before Munich Conference, or up to the Nazi occupation. And they enjoyed it so much, thriving economy, freedoms, human rights, all that. And they enjoyed it so much. So when they saw Israel in 1948 fighting for the same values, they were like, first one, not the government. The government was communist. They were basically governed by Moscow. But the masses, the people, demanded from the government that they help Israel. And they're like, well, we cannot. We have to check with Moscow. But they checked with Moscow. Moscow had their own agenda when it comes to, but they allowed Czechoslovakia to help Israel. So they sent planes and machine guns and ammunition, material, trucks, everything they could, they sent to Israel. So I believe that that's where our Czechs, our bond with Israel started, because we felt like to some extent jealous, but we were sympathetic with this little country amongst enemies, that they have this incredible strength and unity to defend themselves and stay free. We couldn't do it. It was a different time, no problem. History, events happen, but the Israelis did. So ever since there's this, once I learned that, I was like, okay, that starts making sense. That's one part of my love affair with Israel. And it really made sense because I could feel it from the Czech people. And it was because they thought that they looked up Israel. There was a great role model for their own self-determination and their own freedom. So the next stage was playing hockey and getting to know people who had family in Israel, and there was a growing hockey community.
Tyler.
But relatively speaking, it's small, very few. One arena up north, which is about 5 blocks from the Lebanese border. Unfortunately, today it's been shut down for a long time, since October 7th. Even before that, because Hezbollah was threatening it. But I had an opportunity after I retired to go and work at hockey school in Israel. And it was one summer, then I went the next summer, and they were very happy with what I brought as a former professional hockey player with championships. So they asked me at the end of my second summer there, if I would be willing, or if I would want to coach their national teams. It would be U18s, U20s, and the men's team. And not only coach them, but I had to travel with them. We went to foreign countries to play tournaments. And I said, without hesitation, not yes, but it would be a great honor, because I what Israel stands for, I want to help support that and represent that and help the kids represent that around the country, around the world. So we went on a tournament to Croatia, with U20s, U18s, and remember, these kids, a lot of them are 18 and no older than that, because at 19 they're in military. Very few of them get exceptions. You have to be really, really good at something and very, very special to the state of Israel, so they can write you an exception. So you either do not serve or it's delayed. So I had a U20 team who was of all young players, because the players who should be on that team were serving in the military. So these kind of experiences, so U18s, U20s, the men's team, and it was just an amazing, amazing experience, because as a coach, I approach, maybe we were less talented, maybe we were not as deep as far as our players, or maybe we just they didn't have the opportunity to skate as much as the kids from other countries. So what do we do? So I kind of, at each team that I had, I told them about what they represent, and it wasn't just a hockey team. It was a way of life. It was a country. It was a miracle. What they represent is a miracle. Instead of, I look at it as a country of Israel, state of Israel, as a miracle, because it works and it shouldn't. So they understood that, and the way they play for each other and for the country, to this day, I'm standing here, even though I'm hot under these lights, I'm getting chills, because these kids one kid told me, my uncle is in the Air Force, he was in this bombing raid, and all that, I want to be an Air Force pilot. And this kid's playing hockey, they're 16, 17 years old, because he wants to defend his family, his community, his country. It is so inspiring, because we have so much here, and we at times mess it up, and they don't have the space, not literally, but they don't have I'm looking for a word that to make a mistake. They have to be perfect all the time to survive. And Israel just doesn't survive. Israel thrives. And all these things, when it's happening and you're part of it, and then you get involved in the anti-Semitic incident during one of the games, and then you get into anti-Semitic incident because they don't want your team to 16, 17, 20-year-old kids to play hockey because they're from Israel, because they're Jewish. You're like, this is a lot more than the game. And I believe it made me a better man. So that's part 2 of my connection to Israel. Part 3 was the day we landed in Israel, our first day there, first off, we drove to Jerusalem, and we were walking through the old city, and it was a warm summer evening with the Eastern Mediterranean sun setting, and you have this feel. There's something in the air, something in the ground, there's something in the air. And it was life-changing as far as your mind and heart, your soul. It was something different. And all of you have been in Israel. I don't know if you had the same feeling, but it was incredible. Coming from Eastern Europe to North America, having a wonderful family, a successful career, all that. And it was all great. And then we go to Israel, and I'm like, okay, there's more. There's more. And ever since being there the first summer, being there the second summer, going there over and over again to coach or train or travel with the teams and working with people, I believe my life changed. And the way, as I mentioned before, I look at Israel as a miracle. I look at it as a birth of a child. We all know how it happens, but it's a miracle every time it happens. Those are my thoughts. Final thoughts as I was boarding my flight leaving Israel the first time. And then also I felt like it's so inspiring, because they do so much with so little, with no room for error, whether it's politically, whether it's militarily, whether it's economically. The resources, let's face it, there's no natural resources. They got to come up with their own way. They got to desalinate water. They have to turn desert into gardens, not literally, but in those growing fields of growing vegetables and produce and all that stuff. They have to become extremely efficient, because they can only import so much oil, so much gas. It's getting better, but for the last 70 years, it was not easy.
Q&A out.
And so it inspires and it humbles at the same time.
Fake blood.
We have so much,
Why?
and we
Yeah, go.
find a way of wasting human resources, natural resources, all that.
Mhm.
There's so much, and all these lessons then they can apply in hockey, and they did. I came back here because I was coaching high school in Jackson for a few years. And I was sitting down with the coach who's, we all have to be certified by US hockey, this and that, and then we're
I
like,
was thinking
you know what,
30.
we're not doing it right here, because I go to Israel and the kids try so hard and they give you everything they have because you give them opportunity to learn. Okay, they are better, they are more creative because they don't have the infrastructure of coaching or over coaching, as I call it. They don't have, every player doesn't have his own instructor or a private coach or this and that. They have to, again, make the most out of what they have. So even Israeli hockey, as small as it was at the time, it's not much bigger now, but it's better, was inspiring me to improve our own hockey program here or in other places where I went to. So that's kind of why I'm here, why I stand here. Because of all these experiences. And most recently I was talking to my friend there who was my assistant coach. And he was coaching team from Metula that doesn't live and play in Metula, which is the northernmost point of Israel, because it's a war zone at this point. So, and he said, we had such a great tournament. We won a bronze medal. They won a gold medal in one age level, and they won a bronze medal another age group. But at the bronze medal game, he was missing his best player because his player was at home with his wife because the next day he had to report in Gaza as a soldier. So they kind of reality checks. One of my favorite players that I had on the junior teams at the time, the least talent but hardest work. His name is Ikai. I'm not gonna say his last name because he's actually serving as well. He's an Apache helicopter. He took his days off to go coach his different team in this tournament. It was a national tournament. And then as soon as it was over, driving south, getting in helicopters, fighting for everybody's right to live and to live and to love and to create. Okay, create wonderful economy, create wonderful country. So these are examples that are uplifting, but then at the same time, he texted me that after they won the bronze medal, which was with a certain team, his player had to rush home because his 7-year-old son died in the most recent rocket attack in that Druze village. So, and I'm sure you all have heard stories, but I have to share it with everyone as I can because it's reality of the world. And do these people seem like they want genocide or they are supporting genocide when all they want to do is play hockey and live and love? That's the message we need to get out there. There's regular people who want nothing else but peace because they want to live their life. They want the kids to play soccer, not get hit by a rocket. They want the kids to play hockey, not be denied to play hockey because they are from certain country. They're of certain religion. Like that's the world we live in. And I believe that is our responsibility, especially in this country, collectively, to unify and speak out every time we can. Not necessarily speak out and be obnoxious as the other side, but stand up for the truth. There's only one truth. And Israel makes the world a better place. Israel thriving makes the world a great place. And that's why I'm here. There's more, but I think I gave you enough information so we can go to questions and answers because there's a lot more than this way. I don't talk about me and my experiences, but I can maybe answer your questions. Go ahead.
You mentioned that your sister left the country. Where did she go and what did she do or what team did she play on?
Oh, she was, tennis players, they're on their own. She did represent the Czechoslovakia at the time, but when you're traveling, into this day, when all these players, the professional, they say top 50 players, they just travel. Now they have coaches and they have, managers and all that, but she was on her own and she left and she was playing professionally, so she would go to Australia, play Australian Open, okay? And then after, the communist government said, you got to come back and check in. You basically come back, you get your passport stamp, they see you, they probably debrief you, who you saw, what you did, whatever outside. And then they let you go to the next tournament. And when you do that for years and years, you eventually get tired of it. And of course, all your winnings that you work very hard for, you have to give back to the government. You keep very little. And it wears you out. So that's the reasons why she left and defected. I was fortunate, I was gonna do the same, but after I got drafted, but I didn't have to because 6 months later, the democratic changes came and I could freely leave the country.
When you did leave the country and come here, what state did you go to?
Connecticut. Yeah.
So I just want to say thank you. I can't even tell you how much you have like lifted my spirits today. Since October 7th, when I actually happened to be in Israel, I've spent the last 10 months between Jackson, New York City, and Israel, where all my family are. And it's been hard. Probably hardest of all was in New York City, living 15 blocks south of Columbia University, where streets were raging with anti-Israel protests, where it wasn't even safe to walk with a hostage pin or a yarmulke if you're a man, or a Star of David. And the hostility and the feeling of being surrounded by enemies in Israel is so palpable. It's palpable on the streets of New York City. And then I come home to Jackson and I hear you and just thank you, because it doesn't happen much nowadays. And it's just warmed my heart. Thank you.
You're welcome. I know, I talked to, we lived in New Jersey, outside New York City for a long time. Our best friends are still there. They went through the similar situations. My friends in Southern California, and I got calls and texts. And a gentleman in Southern California, he was in a synagogue, and he was just like, he was defeated. I said, no, now it's time to stand up, hold your head high, and just bring your chest up. You have to show the strength. You cannot give in. That was the goal, the intimidation. Part of that event was intimidation. And I think Israel responded incredibly. And I wish there was more people responding with strength and courage, but we'll get there. One of my responsibilities, because my dad fought for the truth, do I fight? No, I don't fight, but I just stand up for what I believe in. And what I think is true. No, I don't think it's true. It's true. There's only, people say nowadays everybody can have their truth. No, that's wrong. There's only one truth. And that goes back 1,000 years. And it's the same truth today as it was back then.
Well, it's not a given that you would do that. So
No, it's not, but I feel very fortunate. My life has been amazing. Okay. And again, she's gonna be embarrassed, but my life has been amazing. I have a daughter who are very proud of. I had some success in professional career. That's secondary. Because fulfilling your responsibility as a man is a man's priorities. Okay, being good at something is a responsibility, but it's not. There's different levels of success. You can do fine with, but what I'm saying is because of all this I have, and it was this country, it was my family who gave me the opportunities and skills. It was this country who gave me the opportunities. It was the mentors and the teachers who wanted me to do well if I put in what I'm supposed to, and it's happening. So now I want to do that for others. I have worked with youth here for the last 12, 13 years in many different ways, because there's no alternative. You gotta fight for it. You gotta fight for the truth. I'm sorry. Rabbi, after.
I just wanted to ask if you had any future plans in Israel in terms of hockey leagues.
Yes.
You had mentioned something.
Yes, because I admire his wisdom. I've known him for a few years now, and every time I see him, it's a moment of joy and wisdom. So my friends that I talked about up in Metula, they're not in Metula. They probably never will not be. I'm not gonna say never, but will not be in Metula for a long time. But he's still coaching. He actually took a course in mental health through improving mental health through sports. So he's inviting soldiers who come back from the front lines to play soccer or to play sport, hockey, or bring their kids and watch and play. So it's kind of a relief for their attention. And he asked me, when are you coming back to do hockey camp? And I was telling Rabbi that I'm gonna need help this time, because when I used to go in the 17, 18, 19, 20, it was organized, and they were like, they asked me to be in this role. First, it was a teacher and coach, and then a coach, the national teams, and my role grew. But it was organized by people from Metula because it was a hockey center of the country. Now that's shifted towards the center, which is safer, but it's been taken over of just by sheer number of immigrants from former Soviet Union. They love hockey, and they want to be really involved. And it's hard for Czech American to penetrate there. So I need to create my own program, and that's why I started talking to Rabbi about I'm gonna need some sponsorship. I'm gonna donate all the time and energy I have for it because I'm passionate about it. I want to give back to children there because I've worked with them and they deserve to learn. And while I'm teaching the kids, my assistant coaches or assistants learning, and they carry my, every time I come, I can expand on that. So what I'm thinking is to start these camps again, and I have to do it myself, organize it through my friends, and I don't have any specific plan. It just came to me last week or so because my friends keep asking, and I feel bad that I cannot provide what he's asking for because he's tough. His life is, he's trying his best. So I want to try a little harder and maybe down the road, seek some sponsorship, whether it's for me getting there or being able to buy ice so I can bring on 20 kids or 5 or 10. It's one at a time and teach. And the desire is going to be there. The demand is going to be there because I've been there. They kind of remember me or know me. And so it's not going to be hard to put it together. It's just going to be, we have to find a way how to put it together. And now I will have specifics, but if just hear me out that maybe down the road there be asked for a little help, some help. Yes.
Well, I want to thank you for standing up for us and especially what you said about peace, that your heart can yearn for peace. It doesn't mean that you don't fight fiercely when you have to, but you're still someone who cares for peace. And I think that sometimes if we read too much of the news, we almost forget who we are reading these images. And I wanted to thank you too for standing up for truth. I taught philosophy, and I'm afraid that truth is not getting a better press.
Oh, definitely not.
Jewish community.
Truth is not getting any press.
It's not getting any press. So this is also a serious issue. And my only question, you're doing a lot, but you're one person. Do you have any sense of what collectively we ought to do? Or any advice?
I know I have one sense. I know I have sense. What I have sense of is one person can do far more than that person thinks. I'll give you example, and I'm not bragging. I'm just giving you example. And some of our friends here know what happened in January. So we're going in the second half of the international hockey season, and the U20 team, Israeli U20 team was. I'm eating dinner at home and we get a message. I get a text message from a friend in Colorado. They've been banned from attending the World U20 World Championship. Their group because International Ice Hockey Federation banned them on the basis of that security. They want everybody else to be safe except the Israelis, so they can stay home. And I said, this has nothing to do. The moment I saw the text, I said, this is not based on security. This is based on boycott, divest, sanction. This is anti-Semitic because, we'll use. They're not stupid, but they're not that smart either. We'll use security concern and ban them. Everybody will go along. Well, I did. That night, I texted my retired friends who used to work for the New York Post and an interview from New York area. Great sports section, hockey writer. I had a great relationship. I said, I know you're retired. Please get me an interview with this gentleman who's Hall of Fame hockey writer in New York Post. Calls me the next day. We did an interview. I challenged National Hockey League, which is another powerful hockey institution, international institution, to condemn International Ice Hockey Federation's actions. So they did, so the article came out the Saturday after, Sunday, NHL went out, condemned International Hockey Federation, banning Israel. Tuesday, I reached out to friends in Toronto, hockey country, that's where hockey started, everybody loves hockey. And again, I'm not saying that to brag, I'm saying that what can be done. What I learned and what I'm trying to tell people that what can be done. I went on a sports talk radio, middle of the day in Toronto, everybody listened, and I said the same thing. I basically went over my issues and I said, how do you prevent 16, 17, 18-year-old kids who just want to play hockey from going to tournament because they're from certain country? This is anti-Semitic, and the country is Israel. So it's over and over, same thing happened over. This is anti-Semitic, this is BDS, this is far more than that. Then late afternoon, International Ice Hockey Federation dropped their sanction, and Israel went to the tournament and got a gold medal. Again, it's not about me, it's what can be done. And yes, if we can come together, if we have more people doing that, great. But if we don't, you do what you can. And that's all we can do. So to answer, long answer to a very good question.
I've been watching a fair amount of Olympics, but I haven't seen very much at all about Israeli athletes, whether by NBC's attention or I simply missed it. Tell us a little bit more about going to the Olympics, if you did, with the Israeli team and Israeli teams, both other Israeli athletes, both summer and winter.
So
Security issues, so forth. So
we didn't do Olympics. We just did the U18, U20s, and men's world championship. There are respective divisions tournament in different countries. The Olympics, they're doing well. They had 3 medals in one day the other day, a couple of days ago. I read Jerusalem Post every day. I talk to my friends there all the time. And so it was a big day. They have several medals, maybe 7, 8 medals, which is just them being able to participate and staying safe is a win. Okay, and so to me, any medals that's great. But to answer your security concern or what it's like to travel with, I was talking to the gentleman Jonathan Pernicus, who's going to speak later tonight about, when they ban Israel based on security issues, they're not banning it. It can be done. We traveled with teams. We were in Croatia, we were in Bulgaria, we were in Mexico, Mexico City, different countries. And if the state of Israel thinks that there's going to be a threat, this is a few years back before what's happening now, they would send their own security. I don't know what agency they were from, and I didn't ask, but there was young men of military age walking us to the rink, walking us back. When we had a practice at 10, we were going to go to the locker room at 9. They would sweep the locker room, put their own tape on the door jamb, so we knew that nobody's been there since they sweep the locker room. Sweeping means not cleaning, sweeping for danger. So it's easy, and then you go and you do your things. They're not in your way. Unless there's a serious threat, they'll stop. They'll stop the team, or they'll stop the management, or they'll let you know. But we didn't face that because Croatians were very helpful. We had uniformed police officers, we had undercover police officers working with our own security. And it's like that everywhere. So this idea, that's why when they said it's based on security concerns, that's nonsense, because state of Israel will provide their own. And when they provide their own, the local law enforcement doesn't want to be embarrassed. So they contribute. It's a silly world at times. But you have to push, you have to ask, you have to stand for what you believe in. Otherwise, people don't care.
How many of your players are born in Israel? It must be pretty hard to learn to skate. You mentioned a lot of them come from the former Soviet Union. Is that where the talent comes from? Because learning to skate is something Canadians do at like 2 years old or 3 years old. So it's amazing anyway. It's like a Jamaican bobsled team.
Yeah.
That you haven't.
You learn it very late because you don't get to do bobsled in Jamaica.
Right.
But so the Canada Center up in Matua, he's been there for 30 years, maybe longer. It's a fairly old arena, renovated and all that. It worked. It doesn't work right now. And most of the players prior to the huge immigration from the Soviet Union, most of the players were local, born and raised in Upper Galilee or Golden Heights. A lot of people would commute from Golden Heights from the kibbutzes up in the hills there. So they were local. But as the years went on and the demographics changed, well, it's only partially because it's the same nation, but people are coming from different parts of the world. And then now suddenly you have more of the some former Soviet Union republics. And they grandfather watch hockey or play, the father and the kids are, and then that caused a couple more arena hockey rinks to be built in the center. So now that because of the security or insecurity of northern Israel, everything's shifted to the center. And that's where it's kind of controlled to some extent. I don't know if you use that word, but unfortunately it is, because I was forced to have a Russian assistant coach in one of these teams. And luckily we got a silver in the tournament, but it was a battle constantly with that because they have their own mind. So to answer your question, not that long ago, it was all locally based kids. As I said, Upper Galilee, Northern Israel, Golden Heights. And as the demographics or the immigrants change, or the origins of the immigrants change, the hockey center is changing as well. So now you have, kids, and I didn't get to speak a little bit Russian because we did have one or two Russians, a Russian kid at the time. But now it's like half, and before you know it, it's gonna be 80%.
That's what I thought, yeah.
Yeah, because it's in their blood.
About your father,
I'm sorry?
about your father. Your father was a legend in hockey.
Yeah,
And he played what, 50s and 60s?
60s and 70s.
60s, 70s. If he had been in the NHL, I know it's a weird question, but if he'd been in the NHL, do you think he would have been a dominant player?
I don't know about dominant, but all-star at times, not perennial, not annually, but he would be right up there.
Yeah.
And my uncle as well, he was even better. My dad was a bigger legend, my uncle was a better player. That's something to say.
Okay.
My dad is actually more known for a lot more than hockey, but my uncle was probably one of the best players in the first 50 years of Czechoslovakia. And we have a lot of good hockey players.
I know.
So, this gentleman's father comes from Bratislava, about 2.5 hours from my hometown. We talked earlier.
Yeah.
Slovakia.
And I like Yager.
Yeah. Who doesn't? Go ahead.
You were coaching the national team, you share experiences with other coaches or other youth players, how they felt about playing Israelis?
Well, because coach is in charge, what's the direction of this team? How are we gonna play? How are we gonna work together? So to me, it was to bring all of them together, as you know, or most people have experience with Israel, everybody's got to pay. And they're actually encouraged to question. So, but knowing that, I had to bring some common ground. And it was, I wish I had a picture of their national team's jersey. It's a Star of David with this dove holding a hockey stick in his beak. Like it's so beautiful that I actually got a couple jerseys made through my friends in New Jersey and New York. So it is nice. But I use that jersey, the crest symbol of what we played for, not for Jonathan or for Ari or Itai. We playing for this, and they all bought in. So it was not that hard because when you take this team and go abroad, they're very isolated.
To be able to express their opinions in a private setting without press.
Other countries. Other countries' players to your team.
Most of them, hockey people are good people. So most of them were good. And they were helpful because this is what happened flying to Croatia. They went through Istanbul. I met them in Croatia, in Zagreb. The team went from Tel Aviv, Istanbul, and they took logos of their hockey bags. They took any names of their luggage, and the hockey sticks and equipment still got hung up in Istanbul. And I knew what happened because my friend said this happened before. And they try to avoid going, but you know what? It's a pretty major airport, and you want to go places, you got to get there.
Yes.
So when we got to Croatia and the sticks didn't show up,
That's why I'm listening.
we have a first practice. The liaison for our team He was a professional hockey player there. He called all his friends. They brought their sticks to the ring.
Well, it's just at the, are you local?
First practice, morning
Are you
skate.
part,
and-
so you found out through the Jewish community?
So most people come towards us. They help
No,
out.
that's fine. I'd come about one, between one, I
But
have it down as between
different
1 and
tournaments.
1:30, then come have coffee and
The Dutch
socialize, and then
team,
we'll get going
they-
about 1:30.
You know, we had a problem with anti-Semitic
Tomorrow, tonight
comments
is
at the
6:30.
end of the
Today's
game
already
in the
underway.
handshake line. So that had to
And-
be, that I confronted the coaches and the players, and that was, we took care of it, but so as I said, most of the time. It's in the spirit of sport or it's in the spirit of Olympics.
Well, we have other speakers starting at
Sure.
1:30.
But you can't take the goodness for granted because it could go sideways or down really fast.
Bobby,
Hageman?
you told that story last night. I know that you don't want to talk about yourself so much, but I think it shows who you are.
Okay, yeah, it's a whole, and we have tonight is Jonathan Conricus at the
You know,
library.
Yeah,
And
so we
he's
played the
former
Dutch, we
IDF
lost, but
spokesperson.
we in
That's
that
free,
tournament,
yeah,
we ended
so-
up staying in the division that we were ranked. We lost, handshake
Okay, see you
line,
tomorrow.
we all go
Oh,
to the
go
locker
ahead.
room. I wait for all the players to
Yeah,
come out.
sounds good.
And by the time I get
Okay.
there, I have half a dozen kids. These are kids, again, 16, 17. I just reminding people that we're dealing with kids, not men. Or boys, 16, 17, 18 years old, and they're crying. And I'm like, hockey players crying? No idea. So my friend, Canadian, but he moved to Israel, married, he speaks fluent Hebrew, he wanted to find out what happened, and I guess some of the kids were called bad anti-Semitic slurs by the Dutch players. And a handshake line while they're shaking their hand, okay, so that's kind of, and I didn't wait for anything, I ran down the hallway, confronted coaches, say, I wanna go to the locker room and ask the kids from the Dutch team to stand up and apologize, to come with me and apologize. They're like, no, it's not gonna happen. I'm like, fine. But I said, it's gotta happen somehow, or there's a problem. So we go to dinner and we all stay in the same hotel. And what I didn't know that, I found out that the kids from the Dutch team asked the kids who they offended to meet them in a separate room and they apologized. And I was completely fine with that because boys of that age could be very badly embarrassed. But this gesture was the right gesture. So again, I could let it go and say, oh, anti-Semitism didn't happen. No, we need to fight that. And most people who are cowardly because they have the size and numbers behind them and offend people or call them names, they're cowards themselves. So you have to confront them. Again, not about me, it's about lessons we learn and what we can do about it.
I may have missed this part, but were you born into a Jewish family?
No, it's this was just a knowing history and what should be done. And the fighting spirit in me is, passed on from my grandfather to my father and just when we see wrong, we try to make it right.
Have you ever had any genetic testing?
No. Yeah, I went to check with my mom and, start doing research.
To field questions from the general public, period.
Just go right into it.
A lot of your tough act to follow.
Sobin, you're next.
For better or for worse? For better.
Look, do you need a easel?
I just said two things. I could have, I'll put these up in a little bit.
Up on the chair.
In a little bit, yeah. So I wanted to start my talk with a thought. And the thought is and I'm gonna be talking about security, which I'm a little nervous about because I have Jonathan Conricus here who knows far more about security. And he will be talking tonight at 6:30, and it is crucial to be at that talk. And I'm sure he'll correct me at 4 o'clock when he hears all the things I say wrong. But Israel's in the midst of a war, and I'm going to be talking about security, but it's also in the midst of an information war. And the narrative that I'm going to ask all of you to keep in mind, and I think it's an important narrative, is Israelis have the right to live in peace and security in their Jewish homeland, and Israelis mean Jews, Druze, Christians, Muslims, people of any religion. And that has been denied to them. It's been denied to them for 10 months. So before I talk about the security, and this is a difficult talk, because every 30 minutes I gotta look at my phone to see if there's something new. I want you to think for a minute what it would be like to live there. We're living here and in a glorious place where the only issue is the weather and a few other things and which hike or pickleball or what I'm gonna play. But especially, which is where my focus is now in the north, this is a whole nother story. I was in Israel in May, for example, and you start to get a feeling of what it's like as I'm going through Haifa and all of a sudden Waze kicks out. And now I got to navigate by the sun. I go to give a talk 8 miles from the border, not 2.5 where it's been evacuated to, but 8 miles. And during my talk, you hear missiles and explosions. Fires, not just a fire here and there, 60 square miles in Israel burnt out all over the place from rockets that have come down. Families worrying. And I don't want to leave you with the thought that there isn't courage there, because there's a ton of courage and a ton of resilience. But it is a different place than it was a year ago. And after 10 months of war, it's freaking enough. Okay? It's enough. And I see it, for example, when I go home where Shabbat is celebrated, and I know the mother, and she makes sure to have all her family there every Shabbat because she doesn't know if her son who's in basic training is going to get a couple days off and be able to come home. Now that would always be something she wants, but especially now because she knows what her son is going to go to. Or her other son that's a year too young to go into the IDF, so he's going to go down to repair the kibbutzim that were destroyed in the south. It's a completely different place, and it's important for us to understand that it cannot continue. Many of you may not know, all of you probably know that 60,000 Israelis have been evacuated, another 10,000 have voluntarily evacuated. You may not know that the schools have been shut down, so they will not start on September 1. So where are they living? They're living in hotels. I've spoken to them, I've met with them. Can you imagine families of 4 kids, 2 adults living in a hotel room as nice as the Virginian or something might be? Can you do that for 10 months? No. So there has to be a change. So what's been going on? For 45 years since the Iranian Revolution, Iran has been preparing for a war with Israel to destroy Israel. They're very transparent about it. Hezbollah, for 40 years, which is an Iranian-created proxy, their most powerful one, has been preparing for 40 years, since the early 1980s, to destroy Israel, and they're very transparent. It's nice when your enemies are transparent. They're not being tricky. They're very clear. Hamas, a little more of a junior partner. Since 2005, when Gaza was given back by Israel, remember, given back by Israel, and the Palestinians would control themselves. Well, within 2 years, Hamas took over, and what are they dedicated to? Read their charter. Complete destruction of Israel. They all have something in common. They're transparent. Those are 3 of really 7 different directions. And I know Jonathan will talk about that tonight more, about what Israel has to deal with. But it's very important to understand the war that's being waged. Israel is very good at, and its doctrine always was, fast victories. And secondly, they take the war to the country that's attacking them. And third, of course, no nuclear weapons with any of its adversaries ever in the Mideast. So we have to give Iran and Hezbollah and Hamas credit, even for the bad guys. You have to give credit where credit is due. They've completely reversed it. The war is now inside Israel. The war is slow, a war of attrition for 10 months. And what is Iran doing while all this has happened? Does anybody think they aren't working on their nuclear weapons quietly? So they've reversed it. So the goal has to be, how does Israel get the initiative back? And it's very difficult politically, internationally, politically here. You've got issues even domestically with the hostages. Well, we saw some things in the last few days that are very important. And by the way, I'm gonna talk dismal for now. I'm gonna be optimistic at the end, and we're gonna be interactive in the middle. So it won't just be me talking. What happened in the last 4 weeks? First of all, Mohammed Deif was taken out. He was basically the #2 guy inside Gaza for Hamas. What makes him important, the guy in charge is a guy named Sinwar, but what makes Deif important, and he survived, I think, 5 or 6 other assassination attempts. What makes him important is he's the guy that put together Hamas's military. He's the military genius in putting it together, organizing it October 7th. And as Hamas tries to reconstitute, and they're trying, his loss is going to be felt. That was 4 weeks ago. And then after what happened at the soccer field at Magdal Shams, where 12 Druze children were killed. And by the way, they say 12 Druze were killed. 50 more were injured. To what degree, we don't know, I don't know, and to how long that's going to affect their life, I don't know. But a guy named Fuad Shukr, I probably am not pronouncing it right, he in a sense pushed the button to send the missiles. He is Nasrallah's right-hand man. He was taken out in Beirut. And if anybody questions whether he should have been, he also was the guy, one of the guys that was responsible for the 241 American Marines that were killed at the barracks in Beirut in the 1980s. And he's a guy, I believe it's the United States, has put a $5 million bounty on his head. So Israel took him out. Shouldn't be anybody upset about that. And then we come to Ismail Haniya, I'm sorry. He was taken out, as we all know, most of you know, I'm sure, in Iran just a few days ago. And that's why we're facing down something that we're going to talk about in a minute. Who was he? Theoretically, their top political division leader, as if there is a difference between the political division and the military division. That's the crap that Hezbollah has pulled for years. We have a political division and a military, so the military one is considered terrorist, but maybe not the political. Finally, the EU has gotten wise to that. But the bottom line is, Haniya was a really bad guy. And you'll see in the press that, oh, he was a moderate. He was important for coming to a deal with the hostages and so forth. That's crap. It's all what Sinwar wants to do inside of Gaza. And all really Haniya was good at was making money. Because he's a billionaire. And how did he make his money? There was a tax on armaments coming from Egypt into Gaza. At one time, if I'm correct, he ran Gaza. He was in charge of Hamas. He was in a little bit of a battle for control with Sinwar, but the hostage negotiations are not ending. In fact, there's some reporting that Haniya was actually blocking it in some way. And what's important about how Israel took out Haniya was they took him out in Iran. They couldn't take him out in Qatar because they had promised not to kill him in Qatar. They had promised early on that they were going to kill those involved with October 7th. The other place he travels to in his opulence is to Turkey. Well, Erdogan is going south on us, and it would probably not be a good move to take him out in Turkey. But in Iran, there was an opportunity. And it's not just there's an opportunity to take him there, but it also shakes up a little bit the Iranian leadership. Like, oh, wait a minute. They can get us, you know what the Blair House is? That's where the United States puts all its visiting dignitaries. That's essentially where Haniya was. It's more of an embarrassment. It's a demonstration. But here's what's important about all of this. For 10 months, Israel has basically been on its back foot. Yes, it's been fighting in Gaza, and yes, and we'll talk about it in a minute, it's had some major successes in Gaza. But remember what I said about Israel taking the war to the enemy, to the other side. These three guys are important links, and this was taking that war to the enemy, to the other side, sending a message, it's not going to be business as usual anymore. And this was crucially important. And what's more, what has Israel been told by the United States and the world? And I'm not getting into politics, but what has Israel been told? Reduce civilian casualties. Well, here was a major development that Israel successfully reduced enemy capability without costing, I think, more than 3 or 4 civilian lives, if that. This is a huge achievement. But now there's going to be a response, maybe. And you read in the newspaper, I'm pretty sure there will be one, but here's what I read. Did I say newspaper? I mean online. I'm too old now to say a newspaper. You see all sorts of things. There could be an Iranian response on Tisha B'Av. Does anybody know what the significance of that holiday is?
Josh.
Anybody want to tell us? Well, I'll tell you. It's, oh, Josh, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yes.
When we commemorate the destruction of the first and second temples and other moments of destruction.
That's correct. And that I think is August 12th and 13th. So the early reporting is Iran thought it'd be pretty cool to have their huge response on Tisha B'Av. Now there's been reporting, it could be as early as before Jonathan speaks tonight. We'll see. Between now and 6:30 p.m., we will see.
I spoke to my colleague in Israel now, 2 hours ago. He said it's going to be a long night. Every night from now on for us is a long night. Everybody wants to be with their families and wants to be. I think they're most likely to attack in the middle of the night.
Absolutely. And there is reporting also that Iran has shut down or warned civilian airlines not to go into Iran. Now, the other reporting is that there's a U.S. carrier heading there. Well, that's good. And the other reporting, which I find that I cannot believe that the world is just humming about it. Iran says that their attack is going to be confined to military sites. They're very clear about it. Hezbollah says our attack's going to be hitting civilian sites. So we're going to see what happens. Now, what happens with Hezbollah for now, they have what are called precision guided missiles. They can be accurate, but they've been using, we'll get into that in a little bit, inaccurate missiles, which allows them to say we're aiming at military sites and we don't give a shit if they hit civilian sites. And that's what's going on. By the way, Jonathan wanted to know if you had to dress up nicely. You also don't have to use clean words. I'm happy to say who gives a shit. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about what's happening in Gaza and Lebanon with Hezbollah, but I'm going to start with the West Bank, or for others, Judea and Samaria. Iran is making a huge effort to flow weapons and to radicalize the West Bank, including there was some reporting that Israel mobilized, I don't know if it's true or not, a few companies to border towns along the West Bank out of concern that there may be a move to push Hamas supporters across the West Bank lines into pre-1967 Israel. Yes, Deborah.
But Cliff, isn't there also activity on the part, unfortunately, of some of the right-wing settlers
Yes.
in the West Bank, and that's created an extremely volatile situation right now. So it's not just that the troops are there solely as a defensive move, but also because unfortunately there have been some acts often committed by people I would call children, but these are children with guns. So, or with.
So what I would say is, yes, it's an incredibly complicated issue though. And I didn't want to get down into statistics of how many attacks there have been from terrorists and how much there have been of some very radical West Bank settlers. I'm not here to say that what they do is okay, and I'm not here to say what the government does, but I will say it's an incredibly volatile situation. But what my concern is, that part about coming across the border, if it happens, is not about settler violence. It's about Iran motivating Hamas people to come across. But now let's get to Gaza. Depending on what you read, essentially the main military fighting, massive amount of divisions is done in Gaza, but what Israel needs to play is whack-a-mole. Depending again on what you read, and Jonathan has more information on that than I think there were 20-something Hamas battalions. Most of them have been knocked out. Some of them are trying to reform. One of the difficulties in Gaza is you got somebody walking around looking like a civilian, and then they go into a house, into the child's room, and they can pick up a gun that's been stored there. So it's very difficult. It's going to be a long, long slog. But the important part is the main military fighting now is over, and it's going to require smaller units to go in to keep when things crop up. However, there's a problem with the Philadelphia corridor. Anybody know what that is? And it's not Philadelphia, because I said that in my newsletter once by accident. I put the A in, Philadelphia. Tell me where the tunnels are coming from, Deborah.
Egypt.
Right, they're coming from Egypt into Rafah, pretty much through the Philadelphia corridor. In fact, one yesterday, I think it was listed, it was large enough to drive a truck through. Now, Egypt is supposed to be shutting down material coming from them into Gaza. It's the only place bad stuff can come through, because otherwise Gaza's got the ocean and Israel, and it's not going to get much through. Obviously, Egypt has not done a pretty good job, whether it's through incompetence, whether it's through payoffs. Matter of fact, I shouldn't say whether, it is through payoffs, and it's through some lack of caring. That's how we got where we are today, because all the material came in through the Philadelphia corridor. So when you hear about trying to do a hostage deal in Gaza and all that, and first of all, I don't believe anything I hear. I don't believe when there are releases that Israel's being tough. I don't know that I believe that when I hear releases always that Hamas is being tough. The real simple fact is we don't know, but there are a couple issues. One, Philadelphia corridor, one way or the other, has to be shut off. Two, the problem is in any hostage deal, phase one includes very few live hostages coming back. Very few. And in fact, I'm reading anecdotally amongst hostage families that those in phase one are a lot more vociferous about a deal than those with soldier children that know that their kids are not coming back in phase one, phase two, and they know this whole thing is going to fall apart anyway. So in Gaza, it slowed down a little bit, but that's where we are. The North, unfortunately, is a different story. This is a chart. I'm involved with an organization in the North called ALMA. This is a chart that just shows in July, just July, the number of attacks, not the number of missiles, the number of attacks that have come into Israel from Hezbollah. 259. Many more in the way of projectiles and so forth. Each attack could be 2, each attack could be 4. In fact, as of July 31st, it was, I think, 6,500, 6,000 to 6,500 projectiles that have come in. When I say projectiles, I'm including drones. And in July, there were 56 drone attacks, 58 anti-tank missiles. Anybody want to tell me what the problem is with an anti-tank missile? A, there's no warning. Is there any interception of them? No. And why is that? I'm testing you.
Well, because first of all, they come low.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they're too, you can't detect them.
You can't detect them. And they come fast, and they're targeted from high ground, either from high ground in Lebanon down into Israel, or from lower ground to Israeli villages and defense bases that are on the high ground. And they have a range of, tell me somebody, maybe 6 miles, sometimes a little bit. I think there are a couple that are a little bit more. That's a long way into Israel. And I know personally about that. Some of you heard me say this, but when I was in Israel in December, I was on the wrong side of a concrete wall. And 2 soldiers came running out and said, get on the other side of it. You're right in their target range, and they can see you to fire an anti-tank missile at you. I parked my car on the wrong side of the wall. So, in addition, 135 missile attacks. Again, potentially of more than one in each attack. What's the problem with these missiles? Well, one could say the problem is they're not accurate, but as I said before, the problem is that they're really not accurate, and they will hit whatever is within maybe a half mile of where they're targeted. Think about it for a minute. The Lebanese border is maybe 40, 50 miles. From here to Moose, how far? 35, 40 miles, something like that? Less? Okay. So double the distance, and think 20, at an average of 20, 25, 30 rockets a day, or drones, And they hear them all the time, buzzing around, coming around. How do you live life like that? Think about the Gravant Mountains over there. Pretend that's Lebanon. And we're sitting here having our talk, not knowing, because we're probably a little more than 2.5 miles from the Gravant, so we're not evacuated. And we're having our talk, we're living our life on this side of Broadway or the other. And missiles are coming. You don't know when, could be at night, could be in the morning. If you are an Israeli, forget about if you're in the 2.5 mile evacuation zone. Let's pretend you're 3 miles away. And your child is going to school because you haven't been evacuated. And you see what happened at Magdal Shams? What are you thinking every day? It's not sustainable. That's what's going on in the north. Now, Hezbollah, at this point, the estimates when I wrote my book were 150,000 missiles. Now, some estimates are up to 250,000 missiles and other drones, etc. The estimates when I wrote my book was about 1,000 precision-guided rockets. Somebody tell me what a precision-guided rocket is. Nobody? Jerry? Well, that's an ex-Marine talking, but for our purposes, it's a rocket that Hezbollah has that can go 200-300 miles in range and hit within 10 yards of where it's aimed. The complete opposite of what I talked about is the missiles that they land within a half mile. Pre-October 7, all the pundits would say, well, Israel has to go to war if they think Hezbollah gets 1,000 precision-guided missiles. They thought that Hezbollah had maybe 600-700. Now the estimates are a few thousand precision-guided missiles. This is a tremendously huge problem. And just to give you an idea, and who's behind it, I'll open that up. Who's getting all the missiles to Hezbollah? Exactly. Anybody in 2006, when there was the second Lebanon war, and the Israeli soldiers were kidnapped by Hezbollah. Anybody have an idea how many missiles Hezbollah had then? Probably around 14,000. Now, 18 years later, they got up to maybe 250,000 between drones, missiles, and much, much better technology.
And these are manufactured.
Good question. 3 places, for the most part. Iran, for the most part, they would try to ship it in through a corridor from Iran through Iraq into Syria, into Lebanon, and Israel was doing what's called the campaign between wars, where they were attempting to destroy the shipments as they come. And they were probably 70% successful, plus or minus, but it's like a leaky bathtub. Eventually it overflows. But in answer to your question further, Deborah, there are attempts to build them in Syria, and that Israel would bomb. There were some attempts to build them in Lebanon, and that got a little more dicey because there was a supposed quiet deal that Israel would not attack into Lebanon. This is all prior to October 7th. But the bottom line is Hezbollah's ability has gone up more than 10-fold, probably 15, 18-fold. And it's not like it's stopping. And I want you to keep that in mind for the next exercise we're going to do. It's not stopping at all. So, what do we do? But before we talk about what we do, how many people here read my newsletter? I don't want to be boring, but I'm going to thank you for that. I'm going to go over something that I like to think about, which is clocks. What are the clocks inside of it right now with this conflict? See if I can remember them all. Somebody read my newsletter, throw one out. One, Iran's trying to get a nuclear weapon. They really don't want to do it overtly because the United States and maybe the EU, but really the United States has said, who knows if we'll keep our promise, we will never allow Iran to get a nuclear weapon. So they don't want to do it overtly. But they're clearly doing it covertly. This is the best thing since sliced bread for Iran, because while all the attention is on Gaza and Lebanon, it can go on doing its little stuff. My view, they probably have what's called the dirty bomb, which is the bomb that set off radiation. but probably do not have the means to deliver it, but it's not clear how long that will take. So that's one clock. Could you imagine this war right now if Iran had a nuclear umbrella over everything? What do you want me to do?
Hold your sign up again. Like Anna White.
All right, like Anna White, this is a repeat, a replay. Should I put this behind me? Clock number 2. Hostage situation. Will there be a deal? Will there not be a deal? Let's pretend there is a deal. If there is a deal, phase 1 is probably 42 days. So Israel's going to have an interest in wanting to get its hostages out. So one would think, but in the fast-moving events that we have, one would think that if a hostage deal gets into place, Israel will probably not push the envelope until they get the maximum hostages they can out of phase 1. But anybody trying to predict what anybody over there is going to do is a fool. So call me a fool. Third thing is politics, U.S. and Israeli politics. The Democratic Convention is August 19th and the 22nd. Unless something really bad happens in the next few days, I would think Israel would not do something supremely aggressive on the ground or in the air until the convention is over. Don't know it. Everything I predict will be wrong. I guarantee it. But that's what I'm just to think about the clocks. The Israeli political clock. Netanyahu's got concerns about whether he can stay in government, but he's got a little breathing spell because the Knesset is not in session for 3 months, beginning several days ago until late October. Although there's a sneaky way of getting in to have a no confidence vote, the likelihood is he's got a now 2.5-month breathing spell to do something. So that could be a hostage deal. It could be an attack into Lebanon. Who knows? Another thing that I think is important is rainy season. How many people have been in Israel in November or December? How about up north? It's foggy and rainy. It doesn't seem to me like it's good fighting weather up there then. I drove a car there once in the midst of all that, and I was worried that Hezbollah could come across the border and take me out, but then I realized they'll never see me because I couldn't even see the end of my car. There was so much fog. And then the final thing is Israeli society. What's the clock ticking on that? The people in the north, very appropriately so, are very insistent that something needs to be done. So where does that all fit? We don't know. But I now want to go to Mary. Do you want to take another picture? You disappeared. Choices. I'm going to apologize because this didn't blow up at Staples like I thought it would. But this is a map showing the different areas. This lighter area with these colored dots is the 2.5-mile corridor that Israel evacuated. And then this is as of July 1st. Not now, July 1st. Different zones back where Hezbollah has attacked each colored dot. You can look at this later if you want. So as you can see, at each attack, whether with drone or rocket, could be more than one. So as you can see, everything is in the game now. So what are Israel's choices? So I'm going to read them, and then I'm going to ask you guys to tell me what are the problems with each choice. And there may be more, but this is just my quick list. Notice I crossed out the 4 and made a 5. But allow things to continue as is. What's the problem with that? Anybody, any ideas? Well,
It can't continue as is because the country is shrinking. You've got X thousand evacuated from the south, X thousand evacuated from the north. The zone is getting bigger and bigger from the north of people that have to evacuate.
Right.
And the entire country is being crowded into the center and effectively reduce the sovereignty of parts of the country.
even our Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, says that Israel's lost sovereignty over the north.
Plus Iran is getting stronger every day.
Plus Iran's getting stronger, the economy is falling apart, Israel's mobilized, you're getting tired, you got social resilience issues. It can't continue as it is. What about number 2? Go for a ceasefire. What's the problem with that? Or are there?
Hezbollah and Hamas get stronger. They get time to regroup and reorganize.
exactly. Was there a ceasefire in October? Go ahead.
Exactly. There was a ceasefire in October 6th, I mean, it doesn't really.
It doesn't do it. And then if you take a look at a ceasefire, sometimes like in 1948, there was a ceasefire and Israel came in the War of Independence and Israel came out charging, I think it was after a 10-day ceasefire. So you have to look at who does the ceasefire benefit? Who's going to get stronger in the interim? How's it going to play in the political field? I don't think ceasefire is an option. What about diplomacy? Anybody think it's beneficial?
No.
Yeah, and it's even worse up in the north. One of the potential deals, we have an American mediator up there now, is that Hezbollah voluntarily moves back 6 miles out of anti-tank range and everything will be kumbaya. The problem with that is Hezbollah's soldiers, the Radwan force, a lot of them live in southern Lebanon within 6 miles. Do you think they're not going to go home? Do you think their uniforms aren't going to be home? Their guns aren't going to be home? They just won't be in mobile forces. Before October 7th, the estimate was 1 out of every 3 homes in southern Lebanon had missiles or other kind of military material. Now, I wrote that and I was wondering, well, how do I prove that? Well, the best proof of that is look at Gaza. That's exactly what went on in Gaza. So diplomacy doesn't look so good, and plus it takes 2 to tango. Okay?
From a diplomatic point of view, they're not even supposed to be there in the first place.
Exactly. So somebody tell me the problem. What if Israel, go ahead, Deborah.
May I argue with you and?
Absolutely. We're here not to agree.
As you know, Winston Churchill famously quipped, the democracy is the worst form of government except for every other form that's been tried.
Correct.
All right. Well, perhaps in this circumstance, diplomacy is the worst option except for every other possibility. Because you and I have discussed, I mean, preventive attack would be tactically great, but Israel would lose in the diplomatic front. I don't know if that matters anymore because Israel's already lost diplomatically. We're very isolated. We're becoming more isolated because we've lost the court of public opinion. And so I've kind of come back to thinking that diplomacy has to continue to be tried, even though I understand why you're going to your next 2 options.
Right, and I don't disagree with that it ought to be tried, but yes.
Sorry, but how about just dry up the money?
Mm-hmm.
By stopping directly supporting Iran financially, that's the United States.
I think that that's part of the issue, but my goal is to say, my goal is to, well, the reason I say part of the issue is because that may be too late right now. That's why I say that's a long-term thing. I totally agree with, but
very, very quickly.
Dry up some oil, there's some in
Well,
some areas.
there's an interesting,
But that's part of escalate or preventative attack.
right, there's an interesting issue with drying up the oil. What was the reason that Israel struck the Houthi oil fields in Yemen? Was it in order to respond to the Houthis for sending that drone towards Tel Aviv? Or was it to send a message to Iran, whose oil port is closer than the Houthi port? Hey guys, look what we can do to you. So let me just go to the other 2. My goal is not to press my own opinion on you, just to give you, because in the end, what has to be decided is what is the best awful option. Preventative war.
Billy, I'm a reporter just at the news guy here in Jackson.
Well, as I said, I'm not I'm explaining the problem.
But in college, I studied with the Middle East. It was a Middle East studies major.
I
And somehow ended up here writing about wildlife.
But what is the negative of a preventative war?
Yeah.
Now, notice I said preventative versus preemptive. Preemptive means you know they're about to shoot tomorrow and you go at it. Preventative is to prevent them.
That's not a terrible spot.
They eventually want to do, whether it's a day or a week or a month from now. Well, I can tell you a few things. Israel probably has 50 key infrastructure sites. In any preventative war, there's gonna be a lot of damage in Israel. The only issue becomes, what advantage do you get by having the initiative instead of going second versus the other things? There are diplomatic issues with a preventative war, no question, what Deborah said, no question about it. Last one, escalate. Well, what do you think those 3 assassinations were?
Israel has only
Change
done once.
by
Yes.
escalating, what I mean is change the
And
rules of the game.
my last 4 years of
And make
service
it clear
between
to
2017
Iran
and
that it cannot just
2021,
sit back
the
and
ideas
smile and let its
international
proxies do its
Okay.
thing.
forces.
Make it clear to
Finished
Hezbollah,
my
meaning
20 years of
Nasrallah,
service
well,
in
if
summer
we can get
21.
your
Sure.
number two guy, we can get you.
Very happy.
And does that change anything?
Sure.
So that's my
Since
purpose. I'm
October
getting the
7th,
hand
since
to
the war
wind up,
started,
but I wanted to promise you, I wanted to tell you my
basically
optimism.
volunteered
Three
for,
things. One,
reserve
I
duty.
believe that Hamas went too
Did
quickly.
3 months.
In this terrible world,
as a
we are
spokesperson,
fortunate
international
that it
spokesperson.
happened before they got even stronger. Number
Between
two,
20 and
we have
40
learned
interviews every
that
night
anti-Semitism is real.
to
Before
top-tier
October
reporters,
7th, I knew of it,
CNN,
but it
Fox,
wasn't topmost in my
MSNBC,
mind.
ABC,
And three,
NPR,
I am so encouraged by all the
BBC as well.
activists that
All the
that have
different networks.
homegrown
We
and
did
grown
that for
up,
3 months.
young, middle-aged, and
Currently, I
old,
am a
that
senior
I
fellow
see a
at
lot
the
of
Foundation
positives
for
ahead
Defense
amongst all this
Analysis,
group. Thank you.
FDD, an American
All right.
think tank.
Mhm.
They sit in DC. And I work out of Israel. I travel a lot as well. I mostly work
Bring
out
that picture.
Great. Well, could I ask you a couple
Hey,
questions?
making me work. Which
You mind
picture?
being the reporter?
of course.
Great, thank you.
This one?
But you're print.
I'm Brent, yeah, so this will not be, you don't have to put your radio voice on.
Right.
Yeah.
What do I know?
But yeah, I think, obviously we're here in the Mountain West, we're pretty far away
Yes.
from Israel, but there are a lot of people who care, deeply about what's happening in the Middle East, whether they're Jewish, whether they are Palestinian.
What
And
size of the Palestinian community here?
it's small, it's very small. There's more people, I think, who are Muslim in Idaho Falls, on the other side of the mountains than in Jackson itself. But, and then there's a number of, I think, folks who don't have a direct connection to conflict, whether they're Jewish or Palestinian. They care about one way or another. Left to right. But I think for you, like, what do you think is the most important thing for people to know and to understand about what's happening in the Middle East
I am gonna just get this.
For Americans to understand, and for anybody who isn't Middle Eastern, doesn't have a Middle Eastern mindset, what I would hope that people could understand that this
I want to welcome all of you.
conflict
this
that is
afternoon.
now
My name is Joe Zolfar, and we've been
spiraling,
having these
deteriorating,
meetings with our
it
legislators
is
for
a
quite some time.
religious
And I, for
cultural
one, I'm grateful that we sort of have a
conflict that
one-on-one.
also deals
Thankfully, we
with
live in a
territory,
smaller state.
but in
If we
essence,
were a bigger
it
state,
is
we probably never
between
would see them face to
country
face.
and a people that
But,
espouse
I
Western
want to
values,
thank
Judeo-Christian
Mary
Western
Grossman.
values of
She's the
the rule of
executive
law,
director of the Jewish community,
monotheism,
and Brad
democracy,
Adams, our
civil
associate
rights, and
director.
human rights.
And they are
Israel.
hosting us today.
And we are confronted
And
with
for all of you who have
ideologies,
had
people and
been listening
organizations
for most of the time,
that
if you need to
are
grab
rooted
something, please
mostly
do
in
that, because I know
the
you've been
Middle
sitting a
Ages.
long time.
And that's what's
Okay.
clashing. To borrow from
You can also
clash of
get
the
up while we are
civilizations, which I'm sure you read in your studies. It is, in essence, a clash between
Okay,
civilizations.
so
Western,
it is my pleasure, and welcome to all of you again for this session.
and
It's my
a
pleasure to be able to introduce Senator
Islamistic
Cynthia Lummis.
interpretation
Senator
of
Lummis
Islam
is serving her first
the other
term as Wyoming
Up
senator.
until a
Believe
few
it's
days
your
ago,
fourth year, correct? Yes.
the last, I
fourth.
would say, 20 years,
And,
been
but
characterized
previously
by
she served as
indirect
Wyoming's lone member
war
of Congress
or
from
battle
2009
between Israel and
to
Iran,
2016.
where Iran
Senator
utilized
Lummis has
various
been a
proxies,
supporter of the
first and
U.S.-Israel
foremost Hezbollah,
relationship
but Hamas
throughout
and
her
Islamic
tenure
Jihad in Gaza,
in
even though they
Congress.
weren't designed
Senator
or
Lummis
didn't
has been
start
a
their way
vocal
as
supporter of the
Iranian proxies.
U.S.-Israel relationship
Hezbollah was, from the
and
ground
has
up,
always sought to
created as an
strengthen
Iranian proxy,
Israel's
but
ability
Hamas
to defend
was
itself.
created as an offshoot of the
Further,
Muslim
Senator
Brotherhood, as a
Lummis
Sunni
has consistently
extremist organization
advocated
that had a
for
different
the use
political
of
goal, but
sanctions
over
on
time,
Iran,
they've
as
merged
well
and
as
come into the
continual
Iranian
aid
fold.
to
And up
Israel
until a few
without
days ago, we
constraints.
basically, or a few weeks, I
In
could
the
say, we
aftermath of
basically had a
October
situation of an
7th,
indirect war,
she stated, quote,
whereby Iran
the fortitude of the
has
people
a
of
strategy
Israel to
to
stand strong
basically
in the
surround
face of
Israel in a ring of
unspeakable
fire
evil
with different
speaks
proxy
volumes
organizations
to the character of their
and
nation.
to
America's
managing a
full
war of
and
attrition,
unequivocal
death
support
by thousands
must
cuts
remain
kind of
as long
strategy,
as it takes for Israel
to break
to rid the
Israel's
threat of
spirit,
Hamas.
its
Unquote.
economic capabilities, its diplomatic
Before I
capabilities, and
turn
then finally
over our talk
have
to
it
the
weak
senator,
enough
I
so
want to
that it
remind
could be
everyone
defeated
that we're
militarily.
gathered here to
That's the
speak with
general
the
Iranian
Congresswoman
strategy.
only about the
And for a lot of years, it
U.S.-Israel
worked very
relationship,
well for them.
not
What we're
Israel
seeing
or the
now,
United
and I think
States
that we're
domestic
actually in the
policy.
middle of quite historic days, is that
Senator,
Israel
thank you for
may
your
have
support
changed its strategy
throughout the
towards
years
Iran,
and for taking the time to
and
join us
Israel
today.
appears to be
We'd like to
forcing
welcome
Iran
you for
out of
some
the
remarks
shadows
before we get
and
into our
forcing Iran
discussion
to
and questions.
confront Israel directly.
Very good. Well,
and
thank
not
you,
only
Joan.
through its
You're
proxies.
always so kind.
As long as Iran was operating
let us
only through
visit
its proxies, it was very
and have an
successful.
open dialogue here.
And if I
Hello,
put
Mary
things on
Jane.
a
It's nice
time
to see
scale,
you.
and I look at how the Iranian strategy has
I
been doing, how Israeli strategy has been
I'm
doing,
horrified
sadly, I would have to give
at
credit
what has
to
happened
Iran for having a much
since the
better
last time we
strategy
were
and for
together.
implementing
Of
a
course,
much
on
better
October
strategy,
7th,
not to Israel. That may be changing now, and I think
Hamas
those two things
did
are
the
the most
unthinkable.
important things for Americans who may
And
not be
there are
very,
still, we
well
believe,
versed
about
in this
115
conflict.
hostages being held,
That it is a clash of
including Americans.
civilizations between democracy, rule of law,
Immediately,
human rights,
those of us who
and
wanted to
Judeo-Christian
assure
values, and
that
medieval
Israel
Islamistic
had
values.
everything it needed
Very
from the United States in
genocidal, by the
terms
way.
of
If you look at
weapons and
Hamas's
support,
charter, Hezbollah's charter, if
chose
you read
to
them, and
bring
I've
to
read
the
their
floor of the
documents,
Senate what's
it
called
is
unanimous
about,
consent motions to
annihilating
send
the
$14
state of
billion
Israel. It is
to
about
Israel,
fighting
not
until
attached
the last
to
Jew
any
is either
other
dead,
funding,
converted,
such as
or in the
funding
sea.
for Ukraine.
That's
We were
their,
unsuccessful because in the
that's their
Senate,
charter and that's their
you can
strategic
get something
objective.
passed by unanimous consent unless
And the
one
second
person
prism
objects.
is the issue of
Now,
Iran against Israel. that
the
Iran is
Democrats
building-
continue to
built this
object
network around Israel,
because
and
their
now that
goal
Israel is,
was to
fighting,
tie
against
Israel
it, there may
funding
be
and
a very
Ukraine funding
interesting crossroads.
together.
Sure,
Because
and
they were
so that's the
afraid
big
that
picture. And I think
if they were separated, that they
there's been a lot
wouldn't
of
get
concern in the
funding for
US. There's been
Ukraine.
concern more recently from the Biden administration.
There was
about
almost unanimous
um,
consent to send
the
in the
civilian
House
casualties,
anyway,
the casualties
or
in
excuse me, in the
Gaza Strip
Senate to
and
get
the West
money
Bank.
to
And
Israel.
the
But
casualties
there
that
was
we're
not
seeing there,
unanimous
are
consent to
those
get money to
necessary?
Ukraine.
Like, and those, casualties, the
That
people that have died.
held us
I
back
think
quite a
it's
bit.
36,000 people.
Then,
I
of
know
course,
that
in
the
the
Gaza
US
Muslim industry
House,
doesn't
there is
distinguish
a
between
very
militants
pro-Palestinian
and civilians.
vocal
But I think
minority
it's safe to say a number,
that
a large number
of
civilians
Democrats that are
Gaza.
really causing the Democrat
Why are
Party
those
the
casualties
challenges in
necessary
terms of setting policy.
to fight this larger war?
That is not the case with the
Yeah, any
Republicans. The
civilian
Republicans
casualty
are
is
united
regrettable
to help
in war.
Israel.
And war is a horrible thing.
So,
Usually
as the
very
fall
few
went
good things
on
come out of
and
war.
Israel
This
bravely
war is a war that Israel didn't
moved
start and it didn't
into
work. There was a ceasefire on October the 6th.
ferret out
October
Hamas,
7th, 6:30 in
try
the
to
morning,
separate them
Hamas
from
broke it
civilian
by
Palestinians
invading into
and
Israel,
move on in
butchering
to
about 850
rid
civilians,
themselves
350
and the world
soldiers, and abducting
of the burden
252.
of
And they did some of
Hamas
the most
terrorism.
atrocious,
US
barbaric,
sentiment began
inhumane
to
acts that I've seen.
move in the
I
direction
to look at different
of
conflicts. I've
protecting
studied ISIS, I've studied Al-Shabaab,
Palestinian
I've studied Boko Haram, I've studied
civilians.
many other
But
terrorist
a
organizations,
lot of
and I've seen
that was
cruelty
being
at large. What Hamas did, I think, outdid
coming from
all of them.
TikTok.
The Israeli response
It's amazing
is
how
designed to
effectively Iran
make sure to
has
eliminate the
used
military
TikTok
threat
and
from
other
Gaza
social
so that
media
it
to
won't
motivate
be able to
people
happen again. That they simply,
against
they
Israel
for sure
and
will
in
have the
favor
same
of
ideology of
the
genocide
Palestinians.
against Israel.
So
and
it
to
has created
annihilate all the
a
Jews. This probably will
monstrous
take
issue for the
at least a
Democrat
generation
Party.
to change, if
But
at all.
interestingly, not
But
a
what Israel
monstrous
is trying
issue
to
for the
achieve
Republican
is
Party.
to
The
deny
Republicans
them
are
of the
firmly
military
in support
capacity
of
to be able to do so.
Israel. Of course,
the way
the
that
Speaker of the House,
Hamas
Mike Johnson,
is
invited
positioned
Benjamin
in Gaza
Netanyahu to speak
is
to a
that
joint
they
session of
rely
Congress
on
just about
hiding
10 days
and
ago
putting their
I
military
attended,
infrastructure behind civilians. What
Benjamin
Israel did,
Netanyahu
and what
gave
Israel has been doing
a
directly
very
and continuously
strong
throughout this war, is to
powerful, heroic
use
speech,
every available
and received
tactic to
widespread
get civilians out of the
applause and
battlefield and
support.
to try to fight only against Hamas.
That said,
In the beginning,
of course, now
Israel
we're
tried to
seeing
negotiate with
about
Egypt
2
and
Saturdays
the
ago,
US and to say,
Hezbollah from the north,
let's evacuate all of the
not
civilians
only
out of the Gaza
pounding
Strip,
uninhabited
open the
areas
gates at
and
Rafah and let them go into Egypt
near
so that we can
misses,
fight,
but now
only fight
taking out
Hamas.
a dozen or
And then
so
there will be very few
children
civilian
playing on a
casualties.
soccer field.
This was denied by Egypt, the
so
US didn't support it, so
Israel's
sadly, the Gazans
response,
were locked
I
inside.
thought, was
Logistically,
timely
isn't
and
that pretty difficult
appropriate.
to move to plus
But
9
now,
people?
even
No.
today, we're
It is
worried
No.
that
It is much
Iran
easier to
via
move them in an orderly
Hezbollah,
fashion if there's a
or
concentrated
directly,
international logistic
could
effort
move
to do
forward
it.
to
Then what's
escalate
being done now is to try to
hostilities
provide
and
food
more.
and shelter and infrastructure
It
to
is
about that same
a
amount of people
terrifying situation
inside
for the
a
world.
combat zone where
Um,
there's been significant structural
I've
damage
been
to all of the
disappointed
facilities.
in
It's much
President
more difficult,
Biden's
there's much more suffering,
response.
and
We
many more people have
appropriated
died,
money
and there's much
to
more diseases and discomfort
provide
and
to
danger
Israel
and societal
quickly a
suffering because they are inside the
battery
combat
of
zone and they've
armaments
been allowed
that
to
they
leave.
requested and
They would have
needed.
been in
Of course, they were
a camp.
using
tents.
the Iron Dome
Israel
and
would have
David's
fought Hamas.
sling
Israel would have
to
defeated Hamas in a matter of a month or
prevent
two.
the bombs that were being
Completely
thrown at them
annihilated Hamas,
constantly
the
from
military. And then civilians
hitting the
could go
ground and
back
killing
and there
people,
would have
but
been far,
those
far less
munitions
civilian
need to be
casualties.
replenished.
But it's unfortunately
And
not
other
relevant, so.
munitions as well. So when the 14
What
billion
then Israel has
finally
done is
passed
to announce
to
ahead
send
of
these
time
arms
the
to
areas
Israel,
that Israel is going to operate in
the
order to
Biden
get
administration
civilians out
began
of certain
holding
specific
off
areas. This
on
is
sending them
unprecedented.
because
No
they
other
wanted
military in
this
modern warfare
ramp from the
telegraphs its
Mediterranean
intentions ahead
into
of time because it gives the enemy an advantage. When you tell your
to
enemy
send
where you're going,
humanitarian aid
they can
in,
prepare.
and
It solves the dilemma of where to be deployed.
there was a lot
And
of
if
foot
you
dragging
know
by the
where your
Biden
enemy is coming,
administration
then
in
that's
terms of
a good
providing
service. So Israel has
Israel
done
what
this
it needed.
continuously throughout the war.
And
The
I found that
number of people killed in Gaza, I
extremely
think, is a
disappointing.
the whole talk
There's a
about
couple
it
of efforts
is
that I've been
a
involved in.
significant
One
achievement for Hamas.
with
You
Tom
can give them
Cotton
credit
earlier this
for
month.
sticking to a
Senator
lie,
Cotton
for fabricating a lie,
sponsored
sticking to a lie,
legislation that I
and
strongly
being
support
creative enough
to
in
make
order to
sure
get
that we get Israel what it
people who are
needs.
not educated enough or
And then, of
lazy or
course, with
willing
Senator Tim
or just
Scott
ignorant to play
to
along with that
condemn
lie.
the anti-Semitism
According to
on our
Israeli
college
numbers and Israeli
campuses.
assessments,
I gotta
which are not
say,
perfect, and I think that
I had
only
no
in hindsight
idea
with a lot of
that
research will we
level
know how many
of
people actually died in
anti-Semitic
Gaza and what was their
behavior was
affiliation, if
being
they were
cultivated
combatants or not.
on our
But
college
according to Israeli
campuses, and
numbers, more
I'm
than
shocked.
16,000, Hamas
And I want to hear
people,
what you
militants,
have
what I
to
call
say about it
terrorists,
and
have
what
been
we can
killed by
do
Israel.
about it. We have
And in
31
addition to that, around
co-sponsors on Tim
20,000 have
Scott's
been wounded.
bill
At least 20,000 Hamas
to
combatants have been wounded.
begin to deny federal funding to
There
those
have
schools
been
that take it and will
various
not control
independent
anti-Semitism on
research
their
and analysis
campuses. It
of
is
the Hamas
completely
figures, and all of them have
unacceptable,
shown that
the
they
manner
are
in which
inflated,
especially
inaccurate,
some of the large
that they do not stand on solid
Ivy League
scientific
schools have
ground, and there are
responded,
many
but other schools
inaccuracies
as
and
well,
inconsistencies. And if you
to
want to, I can send
the
you
anti-Semitic
a few Twitter
behavior, the
accounts that
protests,
are
the
give a very
treatment of
good analysis of.
students. No student
And I
should
think it is
be on
so
a college campus
cynical,
that
it's cynical beyond belief
treats the
that the
students
very
that.
side that started the
It
war,
is
that
it's
rigged
deplorable.
Gaza
It's
Strip with
unconscionable. It's so un-American.
military
I
infrastructure
can't,
below the
it's hard for
civilians,
me to conceive of it.
that is using
So I'm
civilians as
interested
human
in
shields, that
your
prevented
opinions.
Palestinians from
I'm
being
interested in
evacuated
knowing
and stopped civilians
whether
from
that
going
you
out of
think
areas
there's
where Israel
more
was calling
that we
to be
can do.
evacuated. That same side, and by the way, Hamas
How to
uses
encourage the Biden
hospitals,
administration
schools,
to do it.
mosques,
Because we've
UN
got two
facilities
problems.
to fight from
One
indirect
is figuring out what more
So
we
it's
can
so
do as a
cynical and
Congress
amazing that this side,
when
which is responsible
the
for this,
majority
that started the
party
war, that
in
governs
the
the
White
Gaza
House
Strip,
and
that
in the
built
US
these
Senate
hundreds of
are
miles of tunnels
struggling
underneath
with
Gaza and
their
uses them for fighting,
internal
that has been firing rockets from Gaza
communications and
towards Israeli maybe
conversations within.
They
where
play the
they have a
narrative
divided
of
party
our civilians
between
have been killed.
a
Definitely people have killed and war is
Hamas,
horrible.
pro
Israel
Hezbollah,
didn't want this war. Israel is defending itself against a
pro-Iran
very dangerous genocidal
wing
organization.
of their party that's very
What Israel is doing,
vocal,
I think,
even though
the
it is
very
very small.
minimum
So
of what it needs to do in order to defend itself. And I think that
nice to
Israel
be
has
with you
gone
once
through
again.
great
Mary
lengths,
Kay, I wanted
not
to tell
being
you, you know, I
perfect.
had a
Nobody's
lovely
warfare
visit
is,
with your friends
not
from
even the US
Bethlehem.
forces, but by the way, when you
And
compare
we're
the
going to do
ratio
everything
of
that we can to help
civilians
support
versus
them
combatants
too.
killed
The
in Gaza
challenge
between
there
Israel and
is
Hamas,
the
and when you compare
timing
this conflict
with all
to
this going on and
Mosul
the issues that they're
and
encountering.
different periods of
We're
fighting
just
in
not
Iraq
at a good time to
and
have those
other engagements
conversations,
around the
but
world where
they
a
are
military was fighting a terrorist organization within densely
our
populated
minds.
urban terrain. The
Yeah,
ratio
thank you.
of combatants
Let me
versus
see, I've got
non-combatants
staffers here today,
is
Sarah.
the best ever in
Sarah
history
lives in Star
in
Valley
with regards to
and
Israel. It's
offices
close to
out of
1 to
Afton.
2, and sometimes
Jackie
it's less
King is
than
our
1
state
to 2. Now,
director.
each
Jackie
civilian
is
killed
here.
is sad, and each child who's an
Jackie
orphan is
lives in
sad.
Casper,
And
but
suffering,
travels the
there's
whole
significant
state.
suffering in Gaza, and I don't
And
belittle it. I understand that
so
there's
hot,
suffering.
I can't even remember.
But the
Anyway,
ratio
did I miss anyone?
civilians killed
Did I
is
miss anyone, Sarah?
the most
Okay,
mild,
good.
however
The
you
floor
want
is
to put
open.
it,
I
in
want to
comparison to
hear
other
what you have to
similar
say. Yes, sir.
battles. And
I got a
there's
question.
a researcher
How do you
called John
think
Spencer
term
from
ironclad support of Israel should be
what's
defined?
it called? The US Academy West Point.
Well, in my mind,
The Center
that
for
means
Urban
supporting
Warfare.
Israel above
He very
all
early on started to analyze things, and
other
he's written and
countries
published a lot
in
about
the
that whole
Middle East and
scan
elsewhere.
of,
Oh, and before we,
the
so
numbers
I
and
think
comparing how
ironclad
US forces
means
did
without
in
hesitation,
various engagements
without
and what Israel has done, and he has said unequivocally,
um,
we, the US, have never done and we will never able to do what the Israelis have done
showing
in order to
preference over
minimize
another
civilian casualties. And
adjacent
what's sad is that
state
Israel is
or
getting blamed
Israel.
for
What do you think?
killing civilians.
Okay.
Civilians have been killed. What
My
Israel
chief
has
of
done,
staff has arrived.
go to the greatest
Kristen
extent
Walker
possible not to kill them.
is
So, to
a
summarize,
Teton County resident.
I would say that it is
And
the
so there
peak
we
of
have three
hypocrisy
staffers here.
and cynicism by
Thank
Hamas to be
Yes.
using
Thank you for
Palestinians
bringing up
as
the issue
live
of
human
anti-Semitism
shields and then
on
also
college
using their
campuses.
deaths,
As,
which they are
educated
responsible
lay
for,
person with a
in order
PhD,
to try to
recently
win the battle of
graduated
the
and
narratives
works
against
full-time
Israel.
in
And sadly, they have
Stand With Us
helpers
organization.
and
I'm very
assistants around the
familiar with
world
it.
who carry
To my
this
mind,
narrative and who
represents
echo
the
Hamas's
greatest
talking
threat to
points without
Israel
looking into
right
the facts
now
and
with
figures,
conflict
without
in the
analyzing
United
it, and
States.
without
Because
doubting
these
the
students
information coming from
are
a
our
terrorist
future.
organization.
From among them will come
And
our
I
future
hear what you're saying,
leaders.
and
One day
I
even our
approach those
president.
numbers with skepticism, knowing that they're coming from the
Senators,
gospel health
etc.
ministry.
And we go
I also,
witnessing this
I think
systematic indoctrination on college campuses.
see, the numbers that you said,
Anti-Israel
16,000
indoctrination.
Hamas
It is being
militants,
funded
terrorists that have been
by
killed.
massive
The number that
influx
is
of money
coming up,
from Qatar's
36,000
grant
people,
to these
say that's
college
not totally
campuses.
accurate. That still
It
leaves
is being funded
multiple
by the
thousands
AMP, the American
of
Muslims for
Gaza
Palestine
civilians
Association.
who have been
And I
killed.
know that
And I
there is
think
trying
you're
to
mentioning,
be some
U.S.
congressional
intervention, U.S.
this
military
issue
action, Mosul, U.S.
evolve
military
to
action
within our
earlier in Iraq.
lifetime, which is
I
the
think Lloyd Austin
organization
and others have said,
founded in New York
when you kill
by
civilians in a
Kip
large
Swanee.
number, you
Within our
risk
lifetime,
further
standing for within our
radicalizing
lifetime, there will be
people.
no
And
more
I guess
Israel.
with,
And
and
there've
I
been
think we saw that
congressional
happen,
statements issued, I
correct me if
believe,
I'm wrong,
to
in Iraq
that
between the
organization
early invasions
for
of
the
the early
sources of
2000s
their
and then
funding.
the rise of
So
ISIS
I personally would
and going
encourage
into
you
the
as a
fights that we
local
had in
committee
Mosul and
to
everything else
really
going on.
keep
I
America's
guess my
eye
question is,
on that
do you
ball,
risk by
because
continuing this
that's a longer term threat that we have a chance right
military action
now,
in
if we are
Gaza,
willing to stop.
by continuing
It's
fighting
not
that is hurting civilians,
immediate.
killing
It
civilians,
doesn't
do you
relate
risk
to
further
this
radicalizing
particular
people?
war,
And
you
you might
obviously can
dismantle the
use
military
your
infrastructure from
support
us, but do
with
you
respect to what's
risk
happening now.
the ideology
But we
becoming
can't lose
stronger
sight of the
as
longer
more
term
people
battle that I
die and
think
suffer?
we are facing
Yeah,
here
I
on
think
the
looking
side.
at that is applying, it's a mistake to apply
Thank
that
you.
kind of thinking of an expeditionary force.
I too, as I mentioned earlier, I had no
How
concept
far is the distance
of
between
how
the US
embedded in our
and
college
Iraq?
campuses
A
in
few thousand
particular,
miles,
A long way.
long way,
pro-Palestine,
where no American
anti-Israel
civilians were threatened by anybody.
sentiments were.
American civilians
And
were
it's
safe and sound,
propaganda.
protected by two seas and
Truly,
calm
the
neighbors.
TikTok is a
And to
cesspool
apply that logic,
of
I don't think that's a very smart statement. I would say
And
the following.
it is such a
I don't know how much more
influencer
Gazans can be
in the United
radicalized because I
States
think that
that
they are very much
I'm very
on the
pleased that
extreme
the
of
United
radicalization.
States chose
And I
to
base that on
require
their
its
actions
divestiture
and their statements
from
and how they have
affiliation
been
with the Chinese
polling
Communist Party
and voicing their
um,
opinions
in the
before and
United
after October the
States.
7th.
Because it's being
I'll give
used
you a
as
few
a tool of
examples. On
propaganda,
October 7th,
dangerous,
about
very dangerous propaganda.
3,300
But other social media is
people
too.
crossed from
And
Gaza into Israel.
I don't know if
participated
APAC
in
or
the
an affiliate
massacres and
organization
atrocities that they did.
can help
About
monitor
1,200 of
social
them
media
were
or
Hamas
is monitoring social
terrorists.
media to
The
try to
first
help
wave were the
identify
most elite ones. They're
the
stormtroopers. They're called the
genesis
Nukba force. Nukba
this
in
kind of
means
behavior.
special.
Maybe it is
Specially trained and
Qatar.
equipped specifically
I-
for this target, to breach the
I'm,
border, go in, overwhelm defenses, and
anxious
then
to
start
know.
killing and abducting
Yeah, and thank you for
soldiers and
your
civilians inside
suggestions.
bases and communities. And sadly, they did it very, very well. The rest of about 2,000 people were ordinary Gazan civilians, innocent civilians, people who saw that the border was open and just streamed inside and raped and burned and mutilated and pillaged and stole and vandalized and did some of the most horrible things just because they could. And when Hamas brought Israeli hostages back into Gaza, dead or alive, and if you watched a few videos on social media, you've seen how they responded in Gaza on the streets. Tremendous joy, jubilation, and of course, attacking live or dead Israelis that they brought in, kicking and
we've been very
mutilating
focused
bodies.
on these Confucius institutes, which are
and
funding all
what
kinds
they've also
of
done
institute
since October 7th
activities on college
support
campuses
Hamas.
and
So
are
to
closely
say,
affiliated
or
with
to
the Chinese
infer
Communist
that
Party.
maybe Israel
So
should stop
while we've
fighting
been
because
focused
otherwise it might get
on the
worse,
influence that
I think that
China
is a very, very
is
shallow
having on our college campuses,
detached thing
it's
to
possible
say,
that we have
because
just taken our eye
if we
off the
stop
ball
fighting, they will
of
rebuild their capabilities and they will do October 7th
Islamic
again and again.
influence
And
on
this is
college
Hamas saying,
campuses, and that it was
and it's nice
simmering
to
under
be a
the surface,
superpower 3,000
and
miles
we
away from
weren't
home,
seeing it,
only soldiers
and now
exposed
we
to
are.
threat. It's not so
So
nice
maybe
to
that's
have
part of the
these
reason that
animals, these
that
monsters
I'm so
close to
shocked
your civilians and
is
having the
because it
capacity
just
to come
wasn't
in.
something
So the approach is
that
totally
I had a
different. We
beat
have to
on.
make sure that this horrible
But
thing never
that
happens
has all
again. If we let
changed.
down our guard again, if we don't
They
finish the
are
job in
playing the
Gaza,
long
if we
game.
leave Hamas with the ability to rebuild, replenish weapons, rebuild their capabilities, and continue to govern Gaza, we're setting ourselves up for another attempt of another October 7th. And they say so. Hamas leaders have been saying it since October 7th. They've said it in Arabic and have even said it in English. We will do October 7 again and again and again,
We're seeing
and we are
some
going
of
to
that
liberate
in
the occupied lands.
France,
What's the occupied lands? Gaza? No,
and
it's Tel
elsewhere in
Aviv, it's
Europe,
Haifa, it's
where
Jerusalem,
all of a
major
sudden,
Israeli cities. So they're not talking about Gaza.
many
They want to
European
invade into
countries
Israel
are
and
now
kill all the Jews. And I think that when Secretary
minorities
Austin
within
made that
as
shallow comment,
sort of native
I think it's based on
peoples.
a
They
total
are
wrong
now
reading
in
of the
minority in their
situation
own
and what we are
countries.
facing and what the threat
It's
is for
shocking
Israel and for
them,
Israeli
shocks
civilians.
me
This
too.
isn't about politics
So
and winning a war and elections. This is about
the
survival and
question of what
existence.
to do
If
about
we
it
don't
is
take care of the
so
problem, if we don't
overwhelming
completely uproot
because the
Hamas,
Europeans
then we will have a significant, almost existential
are
problem
getting called
at our
racist
doorsteps again.
for protecting
So, no,
their
that is not a
native
consideration.
lands.
However,
And yet,
it is of course
so
very
they
important to
welcome
win a war in such a
these
way that you
immigrants,
establish a
legal and
framework
illegal,
for a better
until they
tomorrow.
are the
And it
minority
is
in their own
absolutely
country.
important to win a war in such a way that
And
the
now
minute
it
that
is creating
major combat operations are over, the environment is something that is
feel
conducive
anxiety
to,
about what do we do about it
first of all,
without
no hostilities, but then
being
second,
racist?
start to build
And
and
man,
restructure
that's
that area and to
that is
de-radicalize it.
almost an
So it is very
imponderable
important not to,
question.
it's important to
Senator, we have a
attack
question over
the
here.
infrastructure and the system that
Senator, thank
created
you for
this
your
monstrosity.
I guess I
And that
wonder
is
if I could
related
ask you
mostly
to
to
speculate a
Hamas
little
and
bit
to
or offer
UNRWA,
your views.
United Nations Relief and Works Agency
as
in
the
Gaza,
things
who
seem to
have
be
been
heating up these
indoctrinating
days,
Gazan children
they're so
to be
much,
Hamas supporters from
Israel.
day
If Israel
zero
were to take an
until they're 18.
offensive stance as
And
opposed to a defensive
if
stance,
anything, if
how would that affect
anybody really
support,
cares about the day after
Israel
in Gaza,
Congress?
then their number one order of
Well,
business should be get rid of
among my
Hamas, get rid of
party,
UNRWA,
uh,
provide
we
funding
think
and
that
assistance and
Israel
help
has the right
schools and
to take an
infrastructure
offensive
and
stance. We
projects
think
and
that
help stimulate the economy. That
Israel
can
has
make
a
change
right
in Gaza,
to
and I'm
destroy
hopeful that will
Hamas.
happen. But
And we
not defeating
recognize that
Hamas is
there
not
will
the way
be,
to achieve.
in order to do that, there's
stability
going
or
to be
peace.
collateral damage.
And
Civilians
at this
will be
point,
killed because Hamas
there
uses
are many other
civilians as
people
human
in
shields.
Israel who are calling for a ceasefire.
So
Yeah.
in order to
To get
fulfill
hostages home.
the
You think at this point
mission
it's been
of Israel
almost 10 months.
to destroy Hamas,
Yeah.
there will be
Are,
innocents.
do you believe the hostages
that
are
get
alive?
caught up in.
And to the people
My
calling
party
for a
understands that
ceasefire,
and thinks that it's
to
Israel's
return
right to
hostages,
continue to
is a
prosecute
ceasefire at this point off the table?
its
Or is it something that could still
war
happen?
as a result
I
of
think,
the
first of
October
all,
7th
it's 115 Israelis, military and civilians,
tremendous murder,
women,
aggression,
children,
rape,
and men, elderly.
the
They are being held. Many are
inhumanity
assessed to be dead
that
already.
occurred
I think in the
that day, and
optimum
that continues
assessment, we're
via
talking about
the prisoners that they have
maybe
taken,
50
the
are alive.
hostages.
But the more realistic assessments are that less
is-
are alive.
Is something we think Israel has a
A
right to
ceasefire is
do.
definitely on the table.
Take them
There are
out,
strong
take them
forces
out.
in Israel
A
who
unanimous
want
feeling within
not
your
a
party?
ceasefire
I
for a
think it is.
ceasefire. They want
I
a deal to
know
get the
very
hostages
well,
back. And part of
there are
that
some
deal
people
means
who
also
are,
a ceasefire.
who don't think that the United States should
And
have
what Hamas has created
any role
for Israel is
in
really
the
a devil's dilemma
internal
in terms of
strife
the lives of
among other
150
nations.
hostages versus
Like
the
maybe
ability of
one.
10 million Israelis to live in peace
And
and
he's a
security.
really good guy,
in
but I
order-
mean, but
which
he
is based on the
has
fact
a
that
very
Hamas will be
libertarian view of the
eradicated as a
world.
military and
That
political organization
that's
in
their
Gaza.
problem, and this is.
And this is the
This is
balance.
our
This is
country,
what
we
Israel
defend our
needs to decide
But
how
in
it
the
achieves
Senate,
both these
there's
things.
probably one
I
Republican. Now among the
my
other
assumption
party,
is my
there are many.
belief is that it can be done.
And in
Israel can
Wyoming,
do
I would
a
say
hostage
this,
deal now, get
what
hostages
we
back,
heard
and
the
then
most
continue afterwards and
between
finish the job
October
against Hamas. I think
and when
Israel
the
has had significant
vote was
battle
taken,
success
that eventually
so far. It's taken us
melded
a long time, but
funding for
currently I
Israel
think
with
that
funding for
Hamas is
Ukraine.
close to where we need Hamas to be in order
Wyoming
to
people were
defeat
livid
Hamas.
that we're not
quite there
defending
yet,
our own
but
border,
getting close.
and we're sending
And as such,
billions
I believe that if there
overseas
is a
for people
chance
to
to get the
defend
hostages
theirs.
out,
And
that should be
and
a
Wyoming
current
people
priority.
feel
The overall
for,
priority, the overall strategic
what's
goal
happening
is and will be
in the Middle East
to
and in
defeat
Israel,
Hamas.
and want to
But
help.
if there's an
But they
opportunity,
don't
and I
want
think
to
that
help
there is,
them
and
if we're
it
not
is
also
definitely on the
protecting our
table.
own border.
There are discussions
So they,
now with the current
Wyoming
situation
people,
with
and
the
it was
imminent
overwhelming.
Iranian
John
attack
Barrasso
on
and
Israel,
I
and
have
perhaps
teletown
Hezbollah.
halls.
I
My
think
staff
that's
answers
a little bit on
thousands
pause,
of phone
but
calls
as soon as
and
that
texts and
hopefully
emails.
is resolved,
And
if it
Wyoming
is,
people were
then we can go back to
overwhelmingly
talking about
in favor
getting
of
hostages back.
closing our own southern border, either at the same time that we
Two more
funded
questions before
Israel and
you go.
Ukraine.
I think there,
or
I've heard from
before.
folks in the community who
But
are,
doing Israel and
you know,
Ukraine without
we're unhappy to see a
closing our
representative
own
from the
southern
Israeli
border
military
is
come
not
and speak with
acceptable in Wyoming,
a
not
representative
acceptable
and
at
not
all.
someone with, you know,
And yet that's what
a
happened.
voice or
Senator, we
advocacy
have
on
a
behalf of
question in the back,
people.
Vicky,
what
and
would you
then
say
I
to that?
believe Mary has a question.
Yeah,
I
I
think
have a
that
question. I'm an
the last
educator.
thing
I
missing
did
for
go down
Palestinians
running
is
for
a
time.
voice. I
I'm
think
not
that they have
plugging
so
that
many
in, but
voices in the
here's
US.
where the
They
university
have
is
far
coming.
more voices than
The
Israel
leadership
Cynthia
they
at the
are
top.
They're
out on the
hiring
streets,
these
bullying, chanting,
staffers, these
espousing
professors,
genocide,
these teachers.
espousing
We have got to
anti-Semitism,
stop it
espousing the
there.
killing of
We
Jews.
need to
And if
evaluate
there's
these people
one
coming
thing
in
that
that
they
are
don't
teaching our
miss,
young people.
that is a voice. So I think
The
that
young
they're
people are
using their
hearing it
voice
from their
exactly to
leaders,
to
which
cement
are their
themselves on the wrong side of
And
history.
I'm an educator.
I come
I
here
am a
in
role
respect.
model.
I come
They
here
are role
learning to
models
listen
for
and
all your
engage.
young people.
I've traveled North
They are
America,
not doing their job.
US, Canada,
And
Europe,
I get just one more thing.
both UK,
They are
Scandinavia, and
causing
other
a
places,
lot of this
and I always
hatred
seek to
within
engage
our
and listen
society,
to what people have
within
to
our
say.
students.
I have a
That's why you
very
have to
firm
be very
commitment
selective
that
on
or
what
belief
school
that
you send
we
your
are on the
kids
right
to.
side and we are fighting
Be
for
very
survival
selective.
against a very, very
That's
dark
I have one question
and
on
evil
that.
enemy. And as
Just a minute.
such, I think that
Mary,
what
did you want?
Palestinians should be
I just
busy
want to say it's
doing
not racist.
is hating us less
Protect the
and
Western
caring for their own
civilization.
future more.
It's simply not racist.
And Palestinians
To allow
are
people to
the
accuse
saddest example
America
of
of
the
racism
eternal
when we're
losers
protecting
that keep
the
on
whole
losing
rule.
against
Our
Israel,
whole rule
keep
of law
on
is
missing opportunity
Judeo-Christian.
after
Yes, it
opportunity
is.
against Israel.
Okay, Islam in
Never learn from
632
their mistakes.
began a
They
world
don't learn because they
conquest.
don't take responsibility for
We
their
thought we
actions and they
stopped
don't
them. Well,
assume
Charles
agency
Martel
over
stopped
their
them
own
in
fate.
France.
They could have been in a
Remember from
totally
World
different
History
situation
class?
had they understood
Yes.
that
At the
Israel,
Battle of
the land
Tours.
of Israel, is the
And that
ancestral
was
homeland
France.
of the
They got
people of Israel.
all the way to
And it's going to
France.
stay like that.
And then we
And the
thought we
moment that
stopped
they
them
come to terms
after
and
World War
understand
I.
that Israel
the end of
isn't
the
going to
Ottoman
go
Empire.
away, and
But they're
they're not
on the
going to
march again. It is not
succeed
racist.
in eradicating us. They've
Protect
had those
Western
dreams for years
civilization.
and they've been nurtured by
And
Arab
to
states and
even
by others,
think
by
that it
Israelis'
is,
enemies. And that has
or to
caused them
have
to
any kind of
believe in their
qualm
lies and
about,
propaganda that we are going to
the idea that
fade away
that
into
we're
history.
being-
We are
it's
not.
not invasion
And what
for
I
votes,
tell
it's
these people
invasion
is
for
if they want to
reproduction.
engage, they're welcome to come and engage. And
Senator
I
Reid.
would
Thank you.
urge them
I
to
wish, people like me should be more
exercise
bold
in
about
neutral
saying that.
perspective,
Thank you.
to exercise
We have
in
3 questions
agency and
over here.
responsibility,
What about the tax
to
exempt
take
status
ownership of their own
universities?
future, not to
How
blame
about you
others
sponsor
for
a
their fate.
bill
If there's one
that
people
puts
in the
that into
world
question?
that could
I mean,
say
religions are
the
tax
world is
exempt, but if
horrible
they get
and
political,
we have had it the worst in history, I think that the Jewish people would be a very strong contender.
step.
There are many
That's
people
pretty
who don't
important to
exist
Cornell.
anymore
Somebody
because
mentioned
they were
Cornell. I think
nominated
that's
by the
fairly
Romans
important
or
to
by
Cornell.
the
But
Never
they could
empires.
sponsor a bill
But the Jews
that
have
puts
endured,
that into
and if
question,
anybody
tax
could say
exempt
that,
status of
oh,
universities under
we are
certain
victims,
circumstances.
Jews could say
Not
that,
free
but we
speech
don't say it.
circumstances, but
And my
funding
message to my
circumstances, right?
Palestinian neighbors is
Yeah,
peace
and
is
that has
possible.
been
The
suggested by
moment
some members
you
of my
decide
party.
to care for your
And
future
we,
more than what you want to destroy our future.
I expect
And
to
Israel has offered
see
the Palestinians
those
4
bills.
different peace treaties to
The
end the
reason we haven't
conflict.
seen more of
4
them is
different
it's very
Israeli prime
difficult
ministers
to
have said
craft
to Yasser Arafat or to Mahmoud
how the
Abbas,
tax
let's end the
exemption
conflict.
is
Here's a deal
lifted.
with President Clinton at Camp David, with Barack, Ehud Olmert, also with
When
US
certain behavior crosses the
negotiations,
line
had
from free
basically
speech.
offered parts of
Defining
Jerusalem and
the line
98% of
very
the
hard to
territory
do.
of
Not
Judea and Samaria.
impossible, but
And
very
they
hard
said
to
no.
do.
And the only
tax
ask
exempt
that
money
Israel
pays for
had
those
was
teachers,
sign
they
here
can
on
block
behalf
out.
of the Palestinian people
You know,
that we end the conflict,
Yeah.
that we accept
Thank you.
that Israel
Any
is
more
Israel,
questions here?
we want to be Palestine,
Senator, I just
and
reviewed
that we
your
end the
question,
conflict.
a
There's
few
no more
ideas,
conflict.
right? One was
They
the
haven't
tax
been
exempt
willing to do
status.
that.
I mean, you could lift it all
So
for universities and
Palestinians,
colleges
they should
and
blame
make them
themselves, they should
taxable,
blame
period.
Arab
You
states that
could
have been
put
using
foreign-
them
foreign
cynically
service
as
committee,
tools
foreign
in
relations
their
committee
warfare
pressure
against
on
Israel. They should
Qatar
blame the
because we
Iranians.
CENTCOM there.
They should
And yet there
blame
was nothing in the
Marxist
press about
left
any back
in
channel
the US
pressure on
and Russian
Qatar to
extremist
do something,
ideology for
either A,
using them
stop
as
the funding of
tools.
Hamas, B,
And the
providing them
sooner
safe haven,
they
or C, the
understand
funding
that they're being
that goes to
used, and the
foreign
sooner they
universities.
understand that they can
You could
own
restrict
their own
foreign
destiny,
university,
that
foreign
will be the
donations
day
to the
that they
US
will go
university
from
system,
this
just as you
miserable
can't
existence
accept
that they are in now, and
contributions
I
from
recognize their
non-US
suffering, and
non-Greek
see them
card holder,
suffering, they
why
can
should
go
the
from that
universities then be
to
subject? That
being
would then also
independent,
take-
Oh, that's a great
proud,
point.
That would also take care of your
self-sustainable,
China
and
problem
not
or our
the
China problem.
social
Yes, it
services
would.
case of the world.
So just a few different ideas
And
there, but and then the
where
last
we're
one
at
is
right
Title
now,
VI under the Civil
Are
Rights
we
Act.
staring down the
Does cover some of the
barrel of
anti-Semitism
war,
that we're
of
seeing
a
on
wider war in the
college
Middle East?
campuses.
Or do you
And then
think we're gonna
broader
go
than
back
that
in the
is you
brink?
could push it down, although I hate saying this out loud, it use the federalization
I
of
think
it.
the chances of
Go ahead. Thank you.
this
Thank you.
escalating further are significant.
Begin by just saying my daughter is one of those
And
who
there's
has been
definitely a
affected
chance of that
severely by
happening.
anti-Semitism on campus.
Uh,
But I want to switch
There are
subjects.
questions whether this
and,
is the the strategic wisest thing for Israel to do currently. 10 months of fighting, diplomatic challenges, political challenges, and many other things that are affecting Israel's capacity to fight. So there's a real question here whether or not this is in Israel's interest. What I believe very clearly is that Israel, and we're going to extend to the Middle East, but I care about Israel. Israel will not be able to live in peace within its internationally recognized borders until it deals with Iran. Because until Iran
It's a great question. I have the same
exporting
question.
terror or minding its own business in
Was very
fear
much
of
opposed
getting
to our
punished,
reset.
Iran will continue to
I
do what they're
thought,
doing. And what they're doing is exporting terror very
it was a
successfully. They're
mistake,
building proxy
for
organizations around
President
our
Biden
borders
and
and in
Anthony
the Middle
Blinken
East.
and
The aim is to
John
achieve
Kerry,
regional hegemony,
to
and they've been doing it
choose
quite
the
well
direction they
until
did.
Israel stands up
I
against
agree
Iran,
with you
which is
that
a
it
much
has
larger
failed.
country. Israel is
I
less
hope
than
they
10
see
million
that
people.
now.
Iran is more than 80 million.
We need to
Yes, we have a strong
reinstate
economy. Yes, we're resilient. Yes, we have
sanctions
an
on
amazing alliance with
Iran,
the US in terms of strategic
and on
backing, which
sanctions
is
on people
absolutely
who do
crucial.
business
But at the
with
end of the day,
Iran,
if Israel wants to live
in
in peace and
avoidance of
security, it
sanctions.
has to
And
deter
that
Iran
includes
from
some of the biggest
continuing
banks in the
to make the
world.
lives of Israelis miserable.
We've been able
And
to
that
track
can probably
that even big
only
American
happen
banks like
through,
JP Morgan
two ways
chose
that I
to
think are reasonable.
subvert sanctions
That
we had with Iran
Israel uses
in order
force
to
in
do
order to
business
put
that
a heavy
benefited
enough
them
price tag
in relation to
on
other
the
countries.
Iranian
So
regime for its indirect war against
I
Israel.
don't think
And
things
then
will
the
change
Iranians will have
if
to think, okay, is it worth it?
the
If the
election
Israelis
stays with the
blow
same
away
party.
our oil exporting capabilities and we can't make any foreign money, that's a problem. And then maybe we shouldn't be funding these
I
terrorist
think they're
organizations and
out of their
sending them
minds,
weapons and urging them to
but
kill the Jews. That's one
I don't
option.
know what
The
their
other option is
rationale- Does
regime
anybody
change
know?
in Iran. If the Ayatollah regime falls and if 80 million Iranians are freed from the yoke of that horrible regime, that probably would be a very good thing
If there's a
for
great
the Middle
revelation
East. It
about
would be
to
very
come,
good
I don't
for
want to give
most
it away.
Iranians, and it would be very good for
But,
Israel.
but,
So to
I'd like
summarize,
to go back to the
I don't
question
know,
of
but I would say,
universities.
if,
I was a
you know, putting in
college
numbers,
professor for a long
currently I
time.
think we're looking at a
And I can
60%
tell you that
chance
the
of
three
this
university
escalating further,
presidents
not
you
necessarily
alluded
into
to
all-out complete war,
cause me a lot of
but
pain. I mean,
more direct engagement
sort of
between
left-leaning
Israel
person,
and
and
Iran,
they cause
and
me a
not
lot
only
of
dealing
pain
with Iranian
because
proxies.
truth
My
is
last
not
thing would
about
be to say
context.
that
Everything is
as an Israeli,
context. And I'd
course,
like
every
to
opportunity I
make
have
a
to
suggestion.
stress the importance of the
I would
alliance
be nervous about
bond
having
between Israel and the
you know,
US.
political
Very important.
authorities
I
telling
think that it
telling
benefits
all
both
of us
countries.
what we can
Israel
teach.
receives
But
weapons
I do
and
see a problem.
systems and funding and diplomatic cover,
One thing
but
that
it also
could be
acts as a
done,
loyal, very
I
loyal
think
and
just
steadfast
read better
ally to the
books.
US, and it
Read
represents
better books
US
in college.
prestige
This
in the
is
region.
where
Had it
I
not been
think
for
the left
Israel,
and the right
the
can
US
come
wouldn't have
together.
any
Figure
significant
Western
influence in the Middle
civilization
East, and it is thanks to
achieve
Israel,
something.
Israeli blood,
And
Israeli
we
fighting
should
that it has.
transmit it
And,
down
it's
the
important to
generations
emphasize. Very grateful
with
for
joy
this.
and pride on people of all races
Well, thank you very
in
much.
our
I really
country.
took 20 minutes of your
Read
time.
better books.
Yeah.
If you read the
Great.
best
Well,
books
thank you.
for
Yeah.
the
Go
last
out and listen
200
to the
years,
senator.
Yeah.
you
yeah.
will know
Listen to her as well.
that
I'd
not
like to.
everything
We'll see
is
if,
context.
Can you get to the
You'll know that you
I
have
do,
to
yep.
be strong.
Thank you very much.
You'll
So
know
if
that
you
you
could,
have
would
to
you
be
send
tough.
the
You'll
link
also
that
know
you,
that human life is
Will do.
precious and should never be squandered. You'll feel it more and more deeply, and you won't listen maybe to lawyers quite so much.
David had a question.
Yes, let me follow up on that. As a University of Chicago graduate, with great books, and a college professor, a medical school professor, I do think it would be a mistake to try to sanction universities because of our First Amendment. But I have a suggestion for something positive. In fact, Islam gave us a great civilization. It gave us the concept of zero. It was a great society in the Middle Ages and did contribute to civilization as well. There are those who argue, and I'm one of them, that this current deviation from Islam is in fact inconsistent with the fundamental truths of it, which do come from the Judeo-Christian tradition. After all, we're cousins, right? Abraham was the father of Isaac as well as Ishmael.
Yeah.
And so taking for that, I think that what the Congress could do, and this is said as someone who used to work way back when for administrations, is fund centers for history or centers for truth and reconciliation at all major college campuses with the explicit goal of reconciliation. These children who are spouting these left-wing slogans are ignorant. My grandson is a student at a university. He recently was bombarded with some anti-Semitic propaganda from someone who had been a friend and who wrote, "I can't be your friend anymore since I find you support genocidal policies." He was crestfallen. He's working on the trail crew in the parks now, and this was somebody he was working with. And he said, "What do I do?" I said, you respond. It's a teachable moment. You say you're not in favor of genocide against Israelis or Palestinians, because we come from a tradition that respects human life as sacred and holy. And I think that if Congress were to fund centers for history, centers for truth and reconciliation, this would be a huge positive thing. Because if you look at what happened in Germany and Japan after the end of World War II, there was a major public education program. In Germany, for sure, a whole generation of young Germans became very well informed about what had gone wrong when good people did bad things. And the same thing happened in Japan. It was a massive public education program. And I think we need something like that now, because these children are ignorant and they are, in fact, subjected to funding from foreign sources, for sure. That we know. Finding that out is an important thing, and you have the tools in Congress to do it, but try to be positive and come up with something like, national centers. First of all, the universities always love money for new things, and they need it. But this would be something really important to promote public education. It wouldn't be limited to the universities, because you would want it to be a community based, because we have a lot of education to do. There's a lot of ignorance that is underlying what's going on these campuses, and it's probably going to start again. That's why I think Hezbollah's waiting until the kids get back to school, and then they're going to really throw the rockets into Israel, because they know that then the campuses will erupt again. But I think the campuses now have to be on top of it and get on top of it right away. This time.
Well, these are very thoughtful suggestions. I want to thank you for being so positive in a time when it's hard to be. So thank you all.
Do you have time for one or two more? Pastor Don, you had your hand.
Thanks for being here and answering questions. I feel also the privilege of making this statement. And Senator, some of my background, and Joan certainly knows my background too, that I spent a good part of 65 years in the scripture. And that comes through wherever I am here at these meetings, or with APAC at the Ward Hotel for breakfast. And discussion there we had together. And I gave my view of why I support Israel. And when I finished, another pastor who was with me, a good friend of mine, said, I support Israel too because it's a democracy. But my reason for supporting Israel was much deeper than that. For Israel, for most of its culture, was never a democracy. It was a monarchy. It was a theocracy. And the only reason it's been a democracy. So what would happen if Israel would change? Or what if another Asian Middle East country would come about with some form of democracy? It would then give a wishy-washy approach to whether they're supported. So my experience with APAC and with the folks from that we met together, and my last long conversation on this was with Ms. Cheney, where we spent a lot of time at the last meeting at the Ward Hotel. And I thought she understood what I was talking about. But now I realize she was a part of what I was talking about. And that is, our culture has shifted all these centuries of philosophers looking for some truth that would bring us together with a unified worldview, so that everything in life would have unification too. And all the philosophers working. And we came about this so 50s and 60s to realize maybe there isn't any truth that we can find, because there isn't such a thing as truth. This is phenomenal. And if you study this, it's so clear. So we came to a point where now non-reason becomes the way. And postmodernism means that you can determine for yourself what's true,
Yeah.
and I can determine for myself what is true. That's not the highest presentation of postmodernism. Now we call it virtual reality postmodernism, which we saw with the Obama speech to 80,000 young people in Denver, where they believed what he said was true, and therefore, so many people believe that now virtual reality postmodernism, it will become true because we believe it. So now you can't quote anybody. We only can quote ourselves, and there's a lot of us. So I had two suggestions, and I'm not sure you asked for a wonderful question, what to do about it. Here's some ideas here, but everything I've heard so far fits my worldview. Why are they now after the West? I know why they're after the West, because the East doesn't have the same foundation. The East is either and plus or and both. There's no law of non-contradiction in Hinduism, Shintoism, Taoism, and Buddhism. Wasn't in the West. That implies that there's right and wrong. And our nation was founded on Judeo-Christian basis, which said that God is real, he isn't phony, he doesn't lie, and his word is true. And that was the foundation. So for many centuries, for many decades in our country, that was the foundation. Then we come to this postmodern thinking, so now that is in question. We've taken God out of the school, and listen, I know there's controversy, but flat out, I care more about our country than what you think of me. So we've taken God out, 60s, we took God out of the culture, we took him out of the schools, we took the Bible out of the school. Now there's no one left to quote but us. So there are no absolutes. Oh, absolutes come from the fact that there's one God. If there isn't any God, there's no such thing as absolutes. Now everything's moving actually be fudged around. Now, here's the 2 points. One, that's where, so when you say you were shocked, I'm not shocked. Pastors like me have been predicting this for decades, because the culture has moved to where there's no absolute truth. Now it's whatever you want it to believe it to be. So you can hold two views, these folks, dear bless their hearts, they can hold two concepts totally in opposition in their own minds. And there's an tension because they chose this to be truth, and they chose this to be true. Almost finished. So you go back to the Old Testament. I know where anti-Semitism comes from. I know where it comes from. I can start with Genesis in the 6th chapter. I can go to the 10th, 11th chapter. I can tell you, I can track it for you to the killing of the baby males by the Egyptians, or to the 2,000 babies being killed by the Roman governor by Herod. And I can track it. I can track it all the way down. So I know where it came from. So if we're not willing to talk about the real root cause and deal with that, the other things become band-aids. And one more that I gave to the APAC people, and this shocked them. There's a growing theology within my side of the church. I can point it out in the Catholic side of the church too, but I really didn't struggle. But I'll point it out in my side of the church, the Protestant church. There's and this sounds totally illogical to people and say this has no connection. It does. There's a theology in the Protestant church that clearly states that Jesus returned in 70 AD. That's called preterism. It's in the Lutheran church. It's strong in the Lutheran church. It's strong in the Presbyterian groups. And I have friends in these groups, okay? So this view says that Christ returned. So all the prophecy in the Bible for what's going to happen with Israel in the future is already passed to these dear folks. Are you with me so far? I'm almost finished. Please let me finish this thought, because I think it'll take it home again. So I can point that out. And so Luther brought this view about called postmillennialism. He believed it. And towards the end of his life, he Googled his name, and you'd be shocked. He was anti-Semitic at the end of his life. And we're all embarrassed as Protestants by that. But his theology took him to that point. And that's true today. There is no place for Israel in the future. No place at all in the Bible for the future of these folks. Therefore, we're going to treat them like any other group of people or any other nation. So they're after the West because the West is Judeo-Christian based. And are they crazy? No, they're not crazy. They have a base view